Welcome everyone to day 2. We have some carryover from yesterday, so we're going to have to be very careful of our time. Brevity is always appreciated. I always like the quote of the West that says, talk less and say more, and that's what we're going to try to do today. We want to make sure that everyone has their say, but let's do it in as brief a fashion as we can. And with that, we take roll, please.
Yes, sir. For joint education, November 16th, 2021, Senator Whiteman.
Here.
Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Senator Salazar.
Here.
Representative Andrew.
Here.
Representative Brown.
Excused.
Excused, thank you. Representative Connolly.
Here.
Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman.
Here.
Representative Newsom. Representative Obermueller.
Here.
Representative Summers.
Yep.
Co-Chairman Scott.
Here.
Co-Chairman Paxton.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Looks like the first item on our business is the consideration of LSO 0107 Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship, and LSO, who's going to explain that to us, please?
Good morning, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. I will walk you through the bill as well as the changes that were made as a result of a working group. You'll recall at the last Joint Education Committee meeting in discussion of this bill, a working group was tasked with revising the bill to bring back an amended version, and Representative Summers and Senator Ellis chaired that group. They met twice and made a number of revisions, and I'll point those out as I go through the bill. 22 LSO 107 working draft 0.8. You'll recall that you saw this bill as I stated in the last Joint Education Committee meeting, but I'll go ahead and walk through it briefly. On page 2, line 2 through page 4, line 11, these are definitions applicable to the program. These did not change as a result of the work of the working group, with the exception of an addition on page 3, lines 9 and 10, adding commission. It was not a substantive change, but more required for operation throughout the rest of the bill. On page 4, lines 9 through 11, this was also added as a result of the working group. Just that last sentence, unmet financial need shall not include any loans a student may be eligible to receive. Page 4, lines 13 through page 5, line 20. This really is the section that creates the Wyoming Scholarship Expenditure Account. This language was revised to match the language that's in the Hathaway bill that you'll be discussing later, to merge the reserve and the expenditure count, as well as to change the amount from, I think, 4.5% to be held in the expenditure count to 9%. And that change can be observed on page 5, lines 12 through 14. One other change to this I would mention as well is that it allows investment of these funds within Pool A. That's a change from the previous draft as well. And then moving on to page 5, lines 22 through page 8, line 6, this is really where you see the scholarship being created, and it sets out the qualifications for eligibility. This section was revised as a result of the working group, and I'll go ahead and point some of those revisions out. On page 6, lines 13 through 15, and the previous bill draft, the requirement was that the student be a resident of Wyoming for 3 years, and that was modified to 1 year in this bill draft. On page 6, at the bottom of the page, there was a section that stated something along the lines of that you had to qualify for federal financial aid, and that was deleted as a result of the work of the working group. Page 7, just before the subsection C, there were extensive provisions governing repayment and work obligations for the scholarship, and those were deleted. Page 7, line 6 through page 8, line 6. This identifies the students that are eligible, including those that are currently receiving a halfway scholarship, previously received a bachelor's degree or baccalaureate or higher degree. You're not a US citizen or a permanent resident alien if you've defaulted on your federal education loan or owe a refund under the federal student financial aid program, or you are incarcerated. I would note that on page 7, lines 13 and 14, this was in a different section of the bill, but for organizational purposes, LSO moved under subsection C. There was a deletion under these sections as well to delete the provision that if you were previously convicted of a felony with the ability to grant exceptions, that was eliminated. And then sort of a superfluous section that stated if you otherwise didn't qualify for the scholarship, then you were ineligible. The working group felt that that was unnecessary, so they deleted that as well. Moving on to page 8, line 8 through page 10, line 10. This authorizes the award of $1,800 per semester if you're enrolled in 12 hours or more. If you're enrolled in less than that, then it is a prorated amount down to 0. This was a working group change. You'll recall in the previous draft, it was $1,500 and now this is $1,800. There's also a change on lines 14 and 15 governing the amount that can be paid per semester, which is $150. There's an amendment proposed for the Hathaway scholarship that you'll discuss later that kind of has that same notion where there's a limit on the per hour amount. Page 9, line 7, this is a conforming, I guess 6 and 7, this is a conforming amendment. The scholarship will be capped at $7,200, which is in accordance with the $1,800 per academic semester. Page 9, line 10 through page 10, line 9 specifies the requirements to remain eligible for the scholarship, including completion of your 2/3 of attempted semester hours, a cumulative grade point average of 2.0, and any other criteria established by the institution to ensure the student gets a degree in a timely manner. And then finally, continuous enrollment of not less than 2 academic terms in successive academic year. Moving on to page 10, lines 6 through 9, this just specifies that students if they fail to meet the subsections that I just discussed, they're not eligible to receive a scholarship under this article again. Moving on to pages 10, really through page 14, this is where a substantial portion of the working group where their revisions reside. The first is on lines 13 and 14. You'll recall in the previous draft, it was sort of to be administered jointly by the commission and the University of Wyoming. And instead, this is to be administered by the commission in consultation with the University of Wyoming. And it really pages 10 through 14 govern the administration of the program. And as I stated, provide that the commission will administer the program in consultation with the university and then outlines the parameters for application. Another change made by the working group is on page 11, lines 18 through 20, and this operates to put in place a $50 million trigger before scholarships can be awarded. So regardless of when the actual scholarship goes into effect, until the endowment account reaches $50 million, no scholarship can be awarded under this act with this amendment.
Co-Chair Scott, you have a question?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, on page 11, line 18, the language "to the extent the balance," that, Mr. Chairman, that confused me. Are you it seems to me if it's a trigger, it's once you've gotten to the 50 million, as long as you stay over it, then scholarships can be awarded. If you haven't reached the trigger, then you don't award scholarships. To the extent sounds like maybe we're segregating the first 50 million off somehow. Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure the language does exactly what they intended to.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, I do think that it operates as this, as a stop mechanism. We can go ahead and modify that language. I'll come up with something a bit more definitive than to the extent. I don't have anything
I may
on the
have an
spot.
amendment.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Matt over here. I think there's two triggers there. One is the first is the 50 million, but there's also a sufficient amount of funds within the expenditure account. So there's two triggers.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe why the to the extent language is used.
Okay, follow up, okay,
Mr. Chairman, I'll come back with an amendment.
go ahead.
Okay, moving on to pages 12 and 13, as I stated, this identifies the process for the state treasurer to transfer funds and also identifies the process to ensure that scholarship recipients are not duplicated. Page 13.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the sentence on page 12 that begins for each subsequent semester in line 2 and continues down through line 15, semester there. I did not understand what that's doing and why it's doing it. Can we have a little fuller explanation of that's what's the 75%? Are we going to tie everybody's future allocations to how much they spend the first time? What are we doing?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, this is for purposes of payment to the commission. It's not based on the scholarship amount. This language and the operation of this program is similar to the Hathaway Scholarship Program. And so we mirrored that language for purposes of payment of the scholarship to the institution, not necessarily what the student's obligation or what the state's obligation is. And then the remaining 25% will be paid to sort of true up whatever the balance of the actual payment to the institution is.
Mr. Chairman?
Follow up, you okay with that?
Go ahead.
Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the policy related to the trigger concept, as I understand it, once the triggers are met, the program goes into effect and then it continues to be in effect, even if, for example, the value of the assets fell below $50 million in the investment account, it would continue to be in effect, as I understand it. I just want to make sure that that's how it's written and intended, and I might be confused, so I wanted to. I guess I'll just ask that. What happens if the value of the underlying asset of the endowment goes to $40 million later just because the market tanks? Does it de-trigger or not?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Office, I think that's a good question.
And that gets into to the extent that Senator Scott was asking about.
Right. So part of the reason for this was there was an amendment, and you'll see in later section of the bill that only allocates $1,000 to the endowment. And so I think the policy decision today could be, if you want to appropriate $50 million, this language would go away. But since we've had an amendment put on by the working group that only allocates $1,000, we have to put in this trigger of $50 million that associated with that amendment. But I think you're right. In the future, if the corpus of the endowment is below on a market value of 50 million, I don't know if it's a market value or if it's a cash value. And so that could be clarified as well.
Co-Chairman Scott.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, on that $50 million trigger, I think it's important whether, no matter what the appropriation is, because you don't know whether we'll get full appropriation. You don't know when it might be there. The purpose is that this is a new program. It's going to take considerable administration. You don't want to spend a lot in administration for a token amount of scholarships. So it's designed to say we'll reach something that will give us a significant body of money to spend before we start spending administrative costs on it. And that might take several years, depending on how the appropriations come out and what we do in future years and all those things. I think the point may be well taken. There's an ambiguity. And I think maybe we can have a very simple amendment that will cure that, so that once you've done it once and have your structures in place, then you continue.
And Mr. Chairman, Paul, same topic, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think too, on bottom page 14, that section on additional funding considerations talks about shortfalls. And what we did here was not a pro rata, which we've done before, but really a first come, first serve. And that carries over to top page 15. That helps.
Mr. Chairman? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that was my next line of questions. So with the first come, first served concept, getting back to the $50 million minimum or some type of minimum, you can imagine a circumstance where revenue is constrained, and I think there needs to be some policy around the idea that if you already have one of the scholarships, and this may be there and I might just not see it, if you already have the scholarship, that you're prioritized and that you'll get to continue that scholarship until it's in, and then awarding additional scholarships is sort of the next tier. So I wanted to make sure, is that how it's written? Is that how it's intended?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ellis, go ahead.
I think when we get through the rest of the explanation, that's in there.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, page 13 talks about that.
And Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, the question you have on page 12, lines 2 through 15, the last sentence on page 11 is the first payment out of the expenditure scholarship to the institutions. The commission will identify the amount for the first semester to each of the institutions. The preceding or the subsequent years or the subsequent semesters, each institution will receive 75% of their preceding amount. And then once the lists are reconciled by the commission, the balance will be appropriated or sent to the institutions. The reason for this, again, it's as Mrs. Heitrek indicated, it's based on the Hathaway Scholarship Program, but it's also to cash flow your institutions at the beginning of the semesters to ensure that they have sufficient funding to pay for the cost of those students.
Makes sense to me. I was initially looking at it as maybe they were allocating out how much scholarships each of the institutions could award. But this is a payment after the scholarships have been awarded.
Okay. Okay, continue, please.
Mr. Chairman, I think where we left off was on page 13, line 11. And this was extensively modified by the working group as well. You'll recall that there was discussion about whether the commission and university, and specifically the university, could promulgate rules. And so as a result of that discussion, you'll notice on line 11 of page 13 that it was modified that the commission will promulgate rules in consultation with the number of entities, the University of Wyoming, the Department of Workforce Services, the Wyoming Business Council, and other stakeholders. And to the member's point on prioritization, you'll note on the bottom of page 13, the preference will be given to those that received a scholarship in the immediately preceding academic term and that remain eligible. And I would also draw your attention to lines 15 through 18. This was also an addition by the working group to acknowledge workforce shortages and economic development needs, economic needs of the community, regions, and the state. And those will be further identified by the commission through their rule and regulation process.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you. I have a question probably for the working group. Was it ever discussed to have a preference for US citizens? I noticed earlier in this document, we have that US citizens and legal foreign citizens are eligible. And I wondered if there was ever a discussion that preference should go to US citizens.
Who wants to take that?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, no, we didn't discuss that because it was in a prior section on who's eligible. And so we didn't do there's two things, but we didn't discuss even a preference for one versus the other. And I believe that language, and I could be wrong, but I think that language goes back to even the Wyoming Works. We used that bit of language on
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can someone help me? I guess I didn't see it. Is there anything in this bill that would prohibit homeschoolers from being allowed to apply for this? Okay. Thanks.
Tanya, or go ahead.
Just one other question that it just kind of made me think, what about military? We've got an issue going on, and just reading through this. We are seeing service members that are initiating in their service that are being dismissed because of their refusal to take the vaccination. So they are actually being threatened with dishonorable discharge, which would not allow them to be able to have their benefits that would go with their military service. Would this be someplace that we would need to look at the potential of allowing those servicemen and women that have lost that opportunity because of their decision to apply for this and to be able to transfer and to get further education that would help them to engage back into work and help them get their feet back under them when that situation has come about? Or is that a potential in this as well? Or?
Yes, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. I think the only barrier is if that's military service member had received Hathaway and had gone and utilized that, then they would be ineligible. So this is broadly, we try to cast a wide net to encourage lots of people to apply. So I think that it would certainly help those individuals if they otherwise met the other criteria.
And what about Senator Salazar's question about homeschool?
So, Mr. Chairman, this is for people 24 years in age and older. So I doubt you'll see that, and there wouldn't be anything anyway. And the only other thing is if you're incarcerated, you can't get so if that military person for some reason also became incarcerated then he'd be disqualified.
Okay, proceed, please.
Mr. Chairman, moving on to page 13, the last item for preferences to be given to students with the longest period of Wyoming residency. You'll recall that earlier in the bill, there was a 1-year requirement for eligibility, and this is a means for the Community College Commission to award the scholarship to long-term Wyoming residents in the event that those funds are somewhat limited.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And that was kind of a compromise that Senator Ellis and I had. I wasn't really comfortable with 1. She wasn't comfortable with 3, so we decided to do a preference. So it was just a compromise that we brought in.
Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So on page 13, looks like line 18 is the beginning of the preference that I was asking about a minute ago. And I'm curious about the may instead of the shall. The previous paragraph has a shall. This one has a may. What were the thoughts there?
Chairman,
Go ahead.
I too have circled that up. I think it'd be right for an amendment.
Okay.
I think both of those mays and also the one on the Wyoming preference. At least in my opinion, I think could take a shall.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, proceed, please.
Mr. Chairman, moving on to page 14, lines 4 through 15, this requires the commission to establish annual reporting requirements for purposes of policy analysis and program evaluation, including a number of data elements there. This was in the previous bill draft. The additions by the working group can be found on lines 8 through 13, just regarding the specifics about what needs to be included in that report. Page 14, lines 17 through 20, this allows the Department of Audit the ability to audit the commission and any eligible institution in the administration of this program. That did not change from the previous bill draft. On the bottom of page 14, moving on to page 15 through line 6, this, as you've discussed, lines 1 through 6 governs if there's insufficient funds to cover the awards that are made. It will be on a first come, first serve basis. And to your point, there will be some interrelation with the preference and previous scholarship awards and the Wyoming residency provisions. And I think if my memory serves me correctly, in the context of the working group, part of the reason why they left that as permissive was to allow the commission broad latitude to administer the program. And I'm sure Senator Ellis and Representative Summers can speak to that better than I can, but that's my recollection of the discussion about the permissive inferences in that context.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this provision, the beginning of 15, how does this work logistically in terms of kind of the cash flow operation of the scholarship? It sounds like this is a reimbursement back to the commission, to the colleges based on eligible students. That was my understanding, and maybe that's not right. If that's the case, this seems like it might be problematic because there could be some expectation that a student has the financial support and then there's insufficient funds and then it's prorated back and the colleges would be left holding the bag, or the commission would, so to speak. But I might be missing the cash flow operation of who gets money when. So can somebody walk that through, what the process of award and payment is relative to the shortfall? I don't know who wants to do that.
Who wants to take that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Office. So each semester, a institution will submit a list of their eligible. Well, I think it goes back to the application process first. So the application process really is students will apply to the eligible institutions. The eligible institutions submit their applications to the commission. The commission is the one who's actually awarding those scholarships to the students because it is under their rules on how those are going to be awarded. So once those scholarships have been awarded to each of the institutions, they'll expend those dollars from the expenditure account to each of the institutions. Treasurer's office, they'll submit a list of the treasurer's office. The treasurer's office will submit a list to or expend those dollars to each of the institutions. In the case that the expenditure account has insufficient funds to pay for the awards, this section will trigger that pro rata reduction based upon each eligible institution's students enrolled in that institution on their application date. So it kind of goes back to at the student level, and that's when that pro rata reduction would be made.
Okay, you okay, or follow up with Senator Office first?
Quick follow-up. So it sounds like there is appropriate timeline then where the student will know that they have the award prior to attending, which is obviously the big key in this cash flow arrangement.
Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think our goal in writing this was to give the commission a lot of rulemaking authority to sort out timelines and some of those questions. So I think when we start hearing some public comment on this bill draft, maybe some of these things will get resolved, and it might be good to visit with them as well.
Co-Chair Scott?
A potential problem here. this, I think this has the possibility of being quite popular and exceeding by a large, the demand exceeding by a large amount of funds available. And it's not intended to be an entitlement. So I think we need a little language in here telling the commission that they need to try to limit the awards to the amount they expect to expend. And then the language at the top of page 15 is a fail-safe so that they don't have to be rigid about, we'll limit it to the maximum amount that could possibly be awarded in the scholarship, that they can make reasonable estimates. And if they're off a little bit, then we've got a fail-safe trigger, fail-safe adjustment. But you have the potential, if you don't have some instruction, the commission to limit the number of awards to what they can afford. You have the potential for suddenly coming up with, we're only going to pay a quarter of what we've awarded or something like that, if it's much more popular. So I think we can fix that with a simple amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, to that point, just from an operational standpoint, your first cohort of students will commence whenever that $50 million threshold is reached. But think of your second cohort. That's when you have two cohorts going through, that is your full potential expenditure amount. It's not that first year, it's that second year when you have that second cohort enrolled. And so one policy option you may want to consider is the initial award shall not exceed potentially 1/2 of the annual revenue from your corpus or something to that effect, where you don't expend that first year of investment earnings in that first year, because the second year will most likely potentially double your amount of awards just due to the cohort nature of programs like this.
Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd just like to go back to the comment by the good co-chairman. And while I understand that concern, for me, reading it, I'd like to make sure that this actually works as a recruitment device. And so that we're not just getting students who have already chosen to enroll in a community college, go to a financial aid officer, and they say, oh, wow, there is a scholarship that it looks like that you'll be eligible for. The idea behind this is that it can recruit students into these programs. So I think we need to be able to assure that the commission can be giving letters to students ahead of time so that they understand how much they'll be eligible for once they start. So it's that balance that I think we need to make sure of in here. So again, we're not just getting students who are already enrolled.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And the amendment that Matt Wilmarth was talking about, we discussed, and basically, at least my memory, and Senator Ellis can correct me if I'm wrong, is we decided that the commission is going to have broad rulemaking authority to do this. And if we can monkey as much as we want on the sides, but they're going to have that same knowledge that we have. So we can put it in there, but I don't know that it's necessary.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think the part that gave me pause with the timeline was just the structure of the language on page 12. Let's see, it looks like line 6. Not later than 30 days after the commission has certified participation and notified the treasurer, the state treasurer shall pay from the expenditure account the amount certified. So you've got eligible students, you've got the commission certifying that they're participating, and then you come up with a shortfall after all of that happens, and then they prorata and chop the list off. That participation seems to imply you've already been granted it, and now it's being taken away. And I think it gets to what Co-Chairman Scott was talking about, where we need to make sure that that order of operations is appropriate, where there's an anticipation of revenue, an award based on the anticipated revenue, which hopefully is enough. And then you don't have to hopefully kick in with the pro rata if you've planned it correctly. And I think that just gets back to ordering the cash flow. It's obviously not any policy objections, just making sure that we don't award some of these things and then say, oh, wait, not so fast. Sorry, we didn't get it right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would point the members to page 11, lines 12 through 16, which requires the commission to adopt rules to notify students in a timely manner. I think that was some of the compromise reached by the working group in discussion of this particular issue. And to Chairman Scott's point about the entitlement, I think the provisions about the permissive preference, as well as this first come, first serve, as well as the language about to the extent the balance of the Wyoming scholarship reaches 50 million and funds are available within the expenditure account. I think all of those provisions were intended to work together. It doesn't mean that they can't be improved upon, but that's my recollection of the discussion from a working group.
Representative Overmuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in regard to the $50 million and the measurement of that, I think it'd be good in this bill to have a measurement date certain, so that whatever the value is at a particular date and time, that all these things can be measured off of. And that number then isn't messed with except when those measurement dates come up, however we set those.
Okay, anyone else?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
I think part of this too is I'm kind of thinking through this, in the Hathaway, there really is no spending policy. It's number of students who qualify, and this is really set up the same way. And I think what we're struggling with is maybe we do need a spending policy, and that's what you kind of said, a reasonable amount. Maybe we put it in there that at no time can more than 5% of the market value or the 5-year rolling average or whatever that language you want to use, 3-year language would be more generous, be awarded. So we always have that because we have 9%. See, and we've changed this. We've gone from 2 accounts, expenditure and reserve, now to just 1 account. But we're losing that, that little marker. So I think because it is finite. It's different than the Hathaway. The Hathaway, we kind of know how many kids we have in the senior class each year. And anyway, so I think we're going to need to do that when we get working the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Co-Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with that, and I'll propose a specific amendment that I think, this really is different from the Hathaway. We control the Hathaway with the eligibility criteria in a way we can't here.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the last point I would note on that is, similar to the Wyoming Works program, I think the Wyoming Works program has a $2 million cap. To Representative Harshman's point, there's a finite number, but sort of operates in the same manner, in that there's a preference and a lot of discretion in how those scholarships are awarded. So moving back onto the bill, page 15, lines 8 through 15, this is the legislative oversight and authority, and confirms that it is not an entitlement and that the program is subject to legislative appropriation. Moving on to page 15, line 17, through the remainder of the bill, really, this modifies existing statute to conform to other amendments in the bill. On page 16, lines 5 through 18, this creates the endowment account for purposes of funding the expenditure account. Onto page 6, bottom of page 16 and on to 17, this is a conforming amendment to 9-4-714, and then on to page 17, sorry, 9-4-15. This is also a conforming amendment that allows these funds to be invested in Pool A, similar to the Hathaway Amendment, which you'll see later in today. Page 18, again, lines 13 through 21. This amends the Hathaway Scholarship Program. It's a conforming amendment to ensure that you're not receiving the Wyoming Tomorrow Scholarship as well as the Hathaway Scholarship. Page 19, lines 1 through 4. This is, as Mr. Woolmark discussed, the $1,000 appropriation from the general fund to the Wyoming Tomorrow Scholarship. That was an addition, and the amount and both the amount and the account were identified by the working group. Lines 6 through 10, again, this is the $50 million threshold for purposes of award of the scholarship. And on line 12, this act is effective July 1st of 2022. With that, subject to your questions.
Okay, any further questions from the committee for Tanya or Matt? No further questions? Okay, thank you. I believe it's time to open it up for public comment. Anyone from the audience like to comment? Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. While we've got folks coming up, there's two things that I'm wondering about that I'm curious to hear about from public comment. I know we'll have some good public comment. The first is how this would interact with the provisional and opportunity scholarships, which honestly aren't as good as this. So if you were to take a provisional opportunity scholarship, it would preclude you from accepting this 4 years later, I think, something along those lines. And I'm curious whether that's been talked through. 6 years later, yeah. And then the other concept is we are using, I think, language modeled after the provisional and opportunity, where you've got 4 semesters and we've got flexibility in term. Was there discussion about trying to provide some more flexibility on that, recognizing that a lot of these folks are probably working and they can't necessarily do a full-time, although that would be great if they could, but they might need to be half-time students as opposed to full-time students, which would make it very hard for them to take 15 credit hours. So I was curious on those 2 points discussion and whether there's any better way to provide flexibility to the student and how this would interact with the provisional and opportunities.
Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know that our committee discussed those 2 points, but I can tell you I've thought about them both. I think the hard part is just trying to set this up and getting it launched. I don't think we're going to, out of the gates, we can talk about it for days, which I know we could. I don't think we're going to ever have a perfect bill. I think our goal was just to get a good bill that would be a starting point, getting this thing set up, getting the account going, getting applicants. And then, like we do with Hathaway, revisit. And so once we get it up and running, how do we fine tune, make it more flexible, make it more, but right now we don't know the applicant pool. And so that was, I want to be mindful of that too, until we know just how many people are going to start applying and utilizing it. So all good points, but things I've thought about, we haven't really discussed.
Co-Chairman Scott?
Mr. Chairman, following up on that, am I right in thinking that the bill would permit scholarships for community college programs that say do not lead to a degree, but are simply certificate programs that may be 1 year or 1 semester in length? I'm thinking, say, of a program. I know we've had them in our college to train truck drivers for the large over-the-road truckers. Big market there, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think you'll see, I think probably a lot of people applying for it. And to Senator Rothfuss's point, 2 years, you're thinking someone who's kind of, aggressively taking classes to get an associate's. How many of those applicants are we going to have? And how many of those are kids that are individuals that once have received provisional scholarships? All of these things, we just couldn't keep thinking of hypotheticals working on this bill, at least when I was thinking through who we're trying to target and who we want applying.
Representative Summers?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Senator Rothfuss, I think it's a good point to bring up in debate. I think that was the original language. It was to keep everything tight.
Yeah.
We tried I think the original bill was designed very tight to try to gain passage. So we didn't have a lot of holes in it, but certainly I think it's a great conversation if we want to extend that spend of the $7,200 or over a longer period of time. Over 4 years, for example. You got to have some end on it, right? But I think that's a good debate, good policy.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just for purposes of the bill, on page 7, lines 9 through 11, the prohibition is if you are currently receiving a Hathaway scholarship. So in the event a student were to receive the Hathaway scholarship, but not, complete a degree, they would still be eligible for this program, to Senator Rothfuss's point.
I misunderstood that. Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay. All right, back to public comment. Please identify yourself. Tell us who you represent.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Erin Taylor. I am here representing the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. And of course, you know that this is something that we've been supporting for a long time, for many years. And so we're really, really pleased to be here. And I just want to express my appreciation for all of the hard work, for the folks who took this and maybe had differing opinions on this, but really sat down and rolled up their sleeves and worked hard. So I just want to say thank you for that. I'm not gonna sit here for a long time. What I do want to say is that there are a lot of folks who are continuing to support this effort, aside from just the Trustees Association and of course the community colleges, but that's our industry partners. And you may have received an email from Cindy Delancey with the Wyoming Business Alliance. It just so happens that another hat that I wear is chairman of that organization. And so I can take my WACD hat off and put my WBA hat on and let you know that the Wyoming Business Alliance fully supports this piece of legislation as well. Some of the other folks who supported this bill in the past, the Associated General Contractors of Wyoming, the Wyoming Association of Career and Technical Education, the Wyoming Nurses Association, and there are others. So there's a lot of folks out there with industry who recognize the opportunity that this affords this population of folks who could have opportunity. And like I want to kind of tag team on what we heard from Representative Connolly. We could use this as a recruitment tool. You know, our community colleges constantly work with, of course, their industry partners, and we can give you examples of what they're doing across the state right now with their industry partners to meet their demands. But when they're trying to recruit a company, and this happens in my community, one of the first things that they ask is, what kind of workforce do you have that can help fill the jobs that we need? And in my community, that's advanced manufacturing. That's what LCCC is really working hard on doing. And I know in Rock Springs, the Trona Patch is planning a huge expansion. And the first thing they did was go to Western Wyoming Community College and say, can you train the people that we need? This is happening all over the state. So other states do use this as a recruitment tool, but I would imagine that our economic development folks would say, hey, we've got this tool and this can help relieve some of that financial concerns with those folks who might want to come and work in those jobs. So I just wanted to offer that. I really think that it's important to, as Senator Ellis said, let's just kind of get it going and we can work out some of the wrinkles. Affording as much flexibility, I think, is really, really key for these students because most of them are place bound. They're not going to move across the state to get their training. We know that happens right now. They need it in their community. They need the flexibility because they are dealing with life. Most of these folks have families already. They're place bound in their communities. So as much flexibility that can be offered, I think would be really important. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for you today. I just wanted to recognize that we are in strong support of the bill. Industry is on our end to make sure that we can continue to creatively and thoughtfully analyze how it's working as it moves forward and where it might need tweaked.
Okay, questions from the committee? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I believe we have someone here from the Department of Workforce Services. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, members of the committee. I don't appear in front of this committee very often, so it's a pleasure to be here today. I just want to take the opportunity this morning.
Could you introduce yourself,
Excuse me,
please?
my name is Robin Cooley. I'm the Director of Wyoming Workforce Services. Happy to be here today. I just want to take the opportunity, I think, to applaud the committee for including workforce services in the bill. This actually targets a group of individuals that the Education Attainment Executive Council has recognized really needs some significant assistance in reskilling, upskilling, and help with career resources. So I applaud that effort. This also recognizes the intersection between workforce services and higher education, which is certainly one that we're trying to strengthen, as with both community colleges and the University of Wyoming. And I think this sets us down a good path toward that. But as you know, a lot of the individuals that we work with in our 20 workforce centers across the state are dislocated workers. This particular bill will target our efforts and assist our efforts in helping them get back into employment, back into good jobs. And as we all know, a lot of those individuals are the natural resource, the coal workers that we've been working with for the last number of years. So I think this bill is a great start. I was very intrigued, I will say, by the comment about a potential for a part-time effort in this. And I know just getting it up and running is a heavy lift and a good step forward. But a lot of the individuals that we work with, the dislocated workers, of course, have families, have bills, they've already been out in the workforce and they have a lot of obligations. So maybe a part-time option would really be something to consider down the road. One thing that I would like to, and the recruitment aspect that was just talked about as well, that is something that we have been frantically trying to think through, is how do we reach outside of the state to bring workers back into the state? Maybe they're workers that have left this, that have a Wyoming connection, that have left the state that we want to bring back. And I think this bill really provides an opportunity to do that. The one thing that I would like to mention is it mentions in here, the student agrees, this is at page 7, Romanet 4. It indicates the student agrees to register with the Department of Workforce Services for applicable training assistance. When we talk about just registering, my concern would be that they can just get on and register with our career site that's called Wyoming at Work. What that does is it just lets them register there, but there's no connection to an individual in our office. And that connection provides them with all kinds of other resources that we can assist them with so that they can be successful in this new endeavor they're taking over. So what I would like to do, there's also a rules provision here where we work with the Community College Commission, and I would like to work with them to really define what it means to register with Workforce Services, because what that means is if you register as a Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act individual, those resources under those federal funds can really be used to assist you in this endeavor. So we'll work with them on that. I just spoke with Mr. Moritz with the Community College Commission, and he is supportive of that as well. So that would be my only concern here, is defining what register means, but I think we can do that in rules. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Questions from the committee? Go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Ms. Cooley. And I have an amendment coming up, and it really, and if you got your bill with you.
I do.
You know, it goes to page 7 and it goes to line 13. And what my amendment does, and I wanted to have this discussion. I'm not terribly concerned one way or the other whether it passes. But basically what it says in here, currently in the bill, has previously earned a baccalaureate degree or higher. And what mine does is basically removes that language and just says previously earned a degree. And so it would preclude people that had an associate's degree from being eligible for this, my amendment would, for this scholarship. My question to you is, as you look at people and employees that are being repositioned and need new new training? Is there a lot of them that have associate's degrees? Or are the bulk of them with no degree and they need to now find some certificate training or something like that? And the reason I ask is this is definitely a limited pot of money, right? It's very limited. And so what this is an attempt to do is have that discussion on who do you prioritize? You prioritize those who have never had a degree of any kind, or do you just allow anybody with a, or you don't allow anybody with a baccalaureate degree or higher? So that's that in-between thing between a bachelor's and a.
Right.
Yeah. So any thoughts? What do you see in the workforce that's being retrained?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, the Education Attainment Council has those numbers. I think they have, throughout Wyoming, we have this gap where we have individuals that have some college education, but have never gotten that ultimate degree, whether that's an associate's degree or that's a 4-year degree. They've just got some college and then stepped out for whatever reason. I can get you those numbers. I believe that they've really identified those down to that level, and I can get those for you, but I don't know that right now, what those numbers would be.
Other questions from the committee? Yes, go ahead, Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks, Director Cooley. I see that DWS is listed among those that the commission need consult with on page 13 in relationship to the article regarding preferences. But DWS isn't mentioned on page 10 on line 14 with student eligibility. Is your testimony that we need to add in DWS there, or are you comfortable with the inclusion of DWS on page 13?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conley, on page 10, could you refer me where? Mr. Chairman, Representative Conley, it would be beneficial to add workforce services in there, I believe, and I didn't catch that. Simply because if you've got individual, we might have a whole pool of individuals that we could really be promoting this to. So I think administering it in consultation with UW as well as the commission, which is what I think you're discussing, I think would be a good idea, because again, it fosters that engagement between the entities that really helps us braid all of these funding sources together so that we're giving the best benefit, the most benefit to these individuals all the way around.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it seems to make sense to me. If you want some tightening of what registration means, it might be beneficial here as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions from the committee? Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like we have someone here from the Wyoming Community College Commission would like to testify. Please come forward and identify yourselves. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Dr. Ben Moritz. I'm Deputy Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission. And with me is Larry Buchholz, our Chief Financial Officer as well. And we just have a few things to say, and then we'd be happy to answer some questions. And also are sensitive to saying more and speaking less, I believe was the phrase you used earlier, so we can stay on schedule. We have seen the growing need for a way to fund working adults outside of the typical approach of Hathaway. And we've been happy to work with the committee members over time and provide feedback on that. So we see this as feeding into the goals of the attainment goals. We also see this as addressing the industry needs. And we also see this as being very timely several things are happening all at the same time. There's been a lot of work, much of it thanks to this body, on improving the seamless transfer across the state, creating a transfer portal so that students or prospective students can learn how they can re-enter the workforce. Increased partnership with industry, next gen sector partnerships are growing and growing, and the colleges and the university are working closely with those groups. And then also more and more data, especially through the contract with EMSI, to create dashboards, again, for Wyoming citizens to see what skills are needed for jobs and how they can obtain those. So all of those things coming together are increasing the demand for education, especially amongst working adults. And we also know that one of the largest hurdles for them is the lack of funds to pay for the cost of attendance, and this addresses that. So we would just like to point that out and acknowledge that this draft legislation may be able to address that. Just a couple of individual items. One of them is on page 10, line 4, perhaps suggesting some language to allow for non-sequential terms if that's needed. I believe Ms. Taylor earlier talked about the need for flexibility, as did Director Cooley. Language something like without other good cause as defined by rules of the commission, or something to that extent, to allow for the possibility that a student may not be able to do consecutive terms, either because those courses are not offered, because something comes up, or because there may even be seasonal requirements for a particular program. One other item is, and perhaps the most important one from our perspective, is that the current language could run into some problems with non-credit programs. On page 3, lines 21 through 23, the semester hours defined as hours attempted for credit. And then that's referenced back as far as satisfactory progress is concerned. Many of the workforce training programs are non-credit programs. Examples might be commercial driver's license, some apprenticeship programs, some IT programs that are short-term offered. I know some of the ones that LCCC, for example, are. And so a recent study came out about non-credit programs across the country, and they are overwhelmingly adopted or enrolled by working adults, because rather than more transfer-oriented academic programs, these are very much focused just on getting you back into the workforce. And so if there are issues that would cause problems with students being able to demonstrate satisfactory progress because of that definition, that's just something that we would point out to consider by the committee.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go
do you have a
ahead.
suggestion for language?
Yes, in Wyoming Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you. In the Wyoming Works language, clock hour is used as an alternative way of demonstrating that. All non-credit programs, if they don't have a per credit hour, they will have clock hour information. So you can use one as a substitute for the other.
Okay, thank you. Senator Ellis, okay.
And then, Mr. Chairman, one final point was removing the baccalaureate language that in the Summers Amendment. We have seen that there are quite a few returning students who may have obtained an associate of applied science degree for one particular profession, and that may have been 5, 10, even 20 years previously, and are now looking to skill up, either because their industry has changed or they are facing layoffs. And so those working adults would not be eligible if that term baccalaureate were removed. And so we don't have that number quantified at this point, but we do see that from time to time. And so that is one concern that we would have. But beyond that, I would I'd be open for any questions, either for me or for our CFO, Larry Buchholz.
Okay, any questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just thinking through the consecutive successive academic terms. I think the thinking was, again, we just don't know how many people are going to apply. So if you have someone that's part of their requirement to remain eligible is that they have to keep going, then we can look at how many of those students are currently enrolled in a 2-year program or whatever, and then plan out or guess a little bit about what, their plans are going to be and if we have enough money, and then give them that preference, because we don't want to start, offering a student the scholarship and then pull the rug out from under 'em midway through a degree. But if you do it, non-consecutive, it's just a planning question. Like, when are they going to come back? If they ever come back, that's what makes it harder to plan. And so, I like this notion of being more flexible to the applicant, but I also think that that's the reason that I think we had, at least in my mind, that's the reason this is in here, is for us to, until we know just how many people are going to utilize this. So do you have a thought or a workaround of how we can get there, or knowledge about how this might work in other states? And that's my only concern is I want to start conservatively and then see how this happens and then adjust from there.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, that's a great point. Planning for ensuring that we don't run out of money, given that this is a new program and we don't know exactly what the demand will be at this point, is key. I think that there have been lots of discussions, both amongst the committee itself and public comment as well, about a variety of preferences. And I think that rules promulgation is going to be key, and working those preferences in. So perhaps that could be one of the preferences that was listed. A lot of the fine tuning would most likely take place in ranking and integrating those preferences into the application process.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis. We currently have some circumstances
Would you state your
prescribed in
name,
rule.
please? Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Larry Buchholz, Chief Financial Officer for the Commission. We currently have some circumstances outlined in rules that allow for somebody to do what we're suggesting here, to not do successive terms. For instance, a military deployment would be an acceptable option to not do successive terms. A devastating event to the family unit, death of a spouse, a serious illness that prevents the student from continuing. So it'd be a finite list of exceptions to the rule. And we've currently got some of that already. So we would just add that into this program to allow for those circumstances.
Mr. Chairman, a follow-up. So, Mr. Chairman, just wanting to make sure, you work with these numbers and I don't. And so what would be something that would be manageable for planning purposes? Would it be like 4 academic terms or 2 years or 4 years? I'm just trying to think of that language on page 10, lines 2 through 4. What would be a term that you would feel comfortable that would allow that flexibility, but also wouldn't extend it indefinitely so that it becomes administratively
Thank you,
messy?
Mr. Chairman.
Go
We
ahead.
currently address it based on individual circumstance. Typically, it is just somebody will opt out of one successive term and be able to come back. But we've dealt with instances in the past where a military deployment lasts for 6 months. That's going to go into 2 terms. So we would allow for that. A religious mission, sometimes those are a year. And we allow for that. So we add time onto the end date to be able to complete. So it really would just be an individual circumstance and what kind of documentation could be provided to substantiate the delay.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up. I just would love some suggestions for language then on line 3. Strike that entirely. I just want to know what would make this work best for you. Line 3, page 10.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, we might add something, quote, without other good cause as defined by rules of the commission. If that is too open-ended, then we could also add something to say that rules will be promulgated to ensure that exception request policy is submitted and acceptable.
Co-Chairman Scott?
Mr. Chairman, what would happen if we would just simply give the commission authority to grant waivers in individual cases as provided by the rules of the commission? Would some simple language like that solve your problem?
Mr. Chairman, I think it would.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Yes, go ahead, Senator Biden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, my question comes at it from a different angle. We've talked a lot about the scholarship stuff, but what we haven't talked about is the rising cost of tuition and the affordability factor for the reason why these non-traditional students don't go to community colleges to skill up and to better their careers. What are you guys doing to control the cost of tuition? It's gone up, I think, more than 35% in the last 10 years from what I've seen online. What's the plan to keep costs under control so we can allow people to go back to school? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman. That's a good question. And it is important to acknowledge that the need is related to cost. This last year, in our one of our most recent commission meetings, the commissioners, supported strongly by the presidents, elected not to do a tuition increase. They held that tuition at the pace that it was. Looking nationally, the Wyoming community colleges are one of the lower tuition rates in the country. We are lower than most of our peer states around us. And when you point out the increase over the last 10 or 15 years, there has been an increase. But then if you look at inflation over that same time, the fixed costs, simply keeping the lights on and paying the gas and electricity, I mean, a lot of those prices have gone up as well. And so, in the Constitution, we are committed to keeping, or in statute, keeping tuition as close to free as possible. And we endeavor to do that. I think one of the pieces also that's important in this is that this will address the cost of attendance. So tuition is quite low. Many times it's other costs associated with returning to school that are another burden for working adults. And this would also address that as well. Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, does that address your topic or anything else?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I actually misspoke. It says here online that tuition and fees have increased 74% for the last 10 years. My follow-up would be, what has the private sector done regarding these types of scholarships? It would appear to me that they know specifically what their needs are for workforce. Has the private sector talked about a scholarship opportunity, or are they just kind of let the government do it and use taxpayer money to do this? Has there been any involvement with the private sector?
Co-Chairman Scott?
Well, Lane answers, and then I have a follow-up on.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman. Earlier, I mentioned the increasing partnership between the colleges and industry, particularly with next-gen sector partnerships and those areas. The colleges and industry and Department of Workforce Services as well have been working more closely together, I think, over the last 3, 4, 5 years to identify not only federal and state funding to braid together to help working adults and address the industry needs, but there are many examples of industry stepping up to be supportive, whether that's through providing funds for capital startup for colleges, equipment, and then also workplace learning and opportunities such as that. So I think that is an area where obviously it's in everybody's best interest to encourage more industry support, but that is not going without. I think it is a growing piece.
Mr. Co-Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, following up on all that, I tend to propose an amendment that would encourage industry to match some of the funds here. And that would be one thing the Community College Commission could consider as a preference in deciding which scholarships, because clearly if the industry is willing to put up some of the funding, they need the workers involved.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, on another note, I'm going to go to my proposed amendment. So my amendment that would basically in the bill now, it says a student is not eligible if he has earned a baccalaureate degree or higher. And so what I'm wanting to have a discussion on is, should that be as previously earned a degree of any kind? In other words, to try to limit that pool. So my question to you folks is basically the same question. What do you see out there for people trying to retrain in the workforce? I don't mean somebody that wants to go back and get another degree, because that's my fear, is somebody's just going to go back to try to get another degree versus somebody that desperately needs to be retrained. So what are you seeing, or maybe if you can answer, what are you seeing coming in the needs for workforce development?
Right.
What are their educational outcomes now or attainment?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers. Yes, I mentioned this briefly earlier. There are many examples of students, or I'm sorry, working adults who 10, 15, 20 years earlier had obtained an Associate of Applied Science or some other associate's or even bachelor's degree to obtain a particular job. And over the ensuing years, that industry has changed and they now need to skill up, and whether that's a certificate or an additional degree. And this would preclude those students. You mentioned the need for those without any degree and how that may be an even more pressing issue. Either that baccalaureate phrase could remain in there to allow for these students, or we could also or insert a separate preference for that, having a hierarchy of preferences, whether that refers to length of time as a resident in the state, number of degrees previously, or anything like that. And that could then be worked out in the rules. Precluding them in the legislation itself would most likely impact a significant portion of the population that we see this as targeting.
Follow up?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And so do you have any data on income earned of people that have a degree of any kind versus people that don't have a degree? In other words, it's also the ability to afford college, right? Because we don't have a means test on this thing. And what we do, we have an unmet sort of thing. But that doesn't go to a person's own bank account. So do you have, who has the most money to go back to college? Those people that never had a degree or those people that have had some kind of degree?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, we don't have that information on hand right now, but we can look into it and get back to the committee with that information.
Okay, any other questions relevant to the bill? All right, thank you. believe the University of Wyoming may be sitting back there patiently waiting. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Kyle Moore. I'm the Vice Provost for Enrollment Management at the University of Wyoming. And I would like to say initially that the university is very appreciative of having the opportunity to be a part of the working group that went through this bill, particularly Senator Ellis and Representative Summers for making it a point to seek feedback from the university and for incorporating some of that feedback to produce what we think is a fairly good bill. And we are very much supportive of this. We continue to be appreciative of the ongoing support and the generosity that this body continues to show for students of the state, and the university is excited about being a part of that continued effort to educate students, whether it be their first degree after a little bit of life experience coming to the university, or if they are going to be in a transition from a community college partner to the university. We are excited about that opportunity. And we don't have any specific recommendations for tweaks at this particular time. And so we simply wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to be involved in the process, and we look forward to being a good partner moving forward.
Okay, questions from the committee? Yes, co-chair, Mr. Co-chair.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say, Mr. Chairman, that is very gratifying for me to see that the university and the Community College Commission are able to work together on something like this. I appreciate the attitude of both outfits.
Any questions from the committee? All right, thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
Okay, any other public comment? Yes, please come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Sean Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Rural Electric Association. Having, I don't think, ever been before your committee, I thought I'd take just a quick second to explain who we are, and it might make sense as to why I'm here today. We represent 11 distribution cooperatives across Wyoming. Those are the rural electric utilities that provide power to farmers, ranchers, small businesses, and communities, rural communities across the state. We also represent 3 generation and transmission cooperatives that they own the power production facilities and the big power lines that get the power to the co-ops throughout the state. We cover about 75% of the land mass in Wyoming and just under a quarter of the population. And many of our co-op headquarters are either in the same town or close by to where the community colleges are. And the common mission of the co-ops is to improve the livelihoods and lives of the members in the communities where we serve. Obviously, a big part of that is providing reliable and affordable electricity, but another big part is our community involvement. And a lot of that comes in partnerships with the community colleges on a number of different aspects. And so when I was asked by a very compelling colleague of mine to get up and speak to these bills, I was going to ask if I might have the latitude to speak to both bills while I'm here so I can get to another engagement.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll start off with 2 things. The first one that you're talking about, the scholarship bill. Obviously, we're in support of that. Our organization provides scholarships to traditional and non-traditional high school graduates and GED folks that want to go into the power line lineman school training. And we provide scholarships. We raise our own money through golf tournaments, through individual contributions to our members. And we provide somewhere around 5 to 8 scholarships a year for Wyoming residents. They don't necessarily have to be a member of a cooperative. We need linemen, line workers. So we will provide those scholarships, but unfortunately we send those kids out of state. There's no accredited line school in Wyoming yet, but there's going to be. So we pour a lot of money and effort into our scholarship program because it provides workers. We need folks both in the outside and the inside, line workers outside and folks on the inside part of the business. And so anything we can do to help support those folks through scholarships and go to these trainings, we'll do. And so obviously we are in support of this, the current bill that you're talking about. The second bill, I like to say funding provides certainty, and what business owner or industry owner doesn't not necessarily require, but needs certainty. And so with the second bill that you all will be talking about, where there's a defined certain funding going to the colleges, that takes a lot away the guesswork that not only the colleges have to do, but industry from our perspective has to do. And I'll give you a quick example. There's CDL training that YDOT had put on for years. And due to, I believe it's a federal change in rules, they're no longer going to do that. And so we're going to be calling upon our community colleges across the state. Some of them already provide CDL training, but we're going to be working with those folks to continue that so we can, train our folks locally. I applaud Dr. Dale from Western. They'll be standing up a power line training school here, I think next semester. I don't want to say that for sure. And we have some folks from the co-ops that have served on that advisory committee to get that up and going. And so I guess I'll just kind of leave you with, one other thing real quick. In terms of, since UW got up here, I would like to just say that a couple of years ago, the co-ops put in the money to stand up a co-op business model class, not just an electric co-op class, but the co-op business model in general. And it's been going great. COVID caused a few stumbles, but we put that money up because we wanted to educate folks that go to UW on what the co-op business class is. And we hope to replicate that throughout the state at our community colleges too. So we have very good synergy with our community colleges, and anything that you all can do to help provide scholarships so we can get some workforce in our utilities, and the certainty through a consistent funding source, we would certainly support. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions from the committee? All right, thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have anyone else in the room that would like to testify, public? Anyone online?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, we're a little bit early, but I think we're going to take about a 10-minute break and come back at about 10:10. I guess that'd be a 13-minute break. Okay, it looks like we're about ready to go. So we'll call a meeting back to order. All right, we'll give you one last shot for public comment. Anyone else like to do a public comment before we start working the bill?
Right there. lady.
Okay, please come forward and identify yourself. Tell us who you represent, please. Welcome.
Our college at Western Wyoming Community College in Rock Springs. I'm also the current president for the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees also. And Chairman Paxton and the rest of the members of the committee. If you have any questions after I'm done or in the middle, just ask away. I'm here as a trustee. I work alongside Erin Taylor. She's our executive director, and she's been a great help to the trustees. As you well know, the community colleges, as you heard from Sean Taylor, they have a lot of requests from us, from industry to provide programs, certificates, degrees, diplomas. And as you well know, we're in the same state as the state of Wyoming. We've received cuts and cuts and cuts, and we're at our bare bones. We're trying to do the best job we can for the state of Wyoming. And I know that you are trying to provide that same coverage for our state. And we want to keep our kids, our adults, the people that are working here in our state, and grow our economy. We've been cut over $94 million over the last 10 years. I'm sure you've heard that. And unlike some of the other institutions, we also, our funding comes from our local counties. And as you well know, those assessments that have been low over the course of the past years. And so even our local funding has been cut. So we're trying to answer the call, which we've always done for the state of Wyoming, provide those services for the people in our state. One example I'd like to give you, and that's from our corner of the state, Southwest Wyoming, our trona industry. We have 3 plants that are expanding, and they are requesting us to provide different programs for management, workforce services. As you heard from Sean Taylor, we're about to start our power line program, and we're really excited about that. Just to make you aware of the dire need that we're in, we have lost just not only in our college, but in the other 7 colleges. And we're going to include Gillette in that since they've been voted in. And that we need to find some stable source of financing. And we think that this bill will provide that and help us maintain the quality of education that we can provide to our state. And I stand for any questions.
Okay, questions from the committee? Yes, Mr. Co-Chair.
When you say this bill, are you referring to this Wyoming Tomorrow Scholarship Bill or the Community College Endowment Bill?
I think it's your bill.
Yeah.
Is that up next?
The community
But
college.
also, yes, also
it's
for
a
the
draft
tomorrow,
committee.
yes, for both bills, because
Okay.
yes, our adult learners, you know, they're kind of stuck at their homes. And not all of them can come to Laramie or go on to another four-year college. And so, yes, absolutely, tomorrow's bill is very important to the colleges in helping our students because we've raised their tuition over these last 10 years. So they've been helping themselves just as you've been helping us.
Okay, for the question, yes. Representative Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curiously, just to help me get a better understanding of how this all works. Like when you're saying that like the Trona industry is expanding rapidly and they're coming to you and asking for specific career types or whatever, or excellences or expertise in certain areas, what are they do they offer dollars and to help you encourage these programs? Or do we see companies coming in and wanting to shoulder with you guys to offer dollars to help, defray some of the expense from the state and also help to drive some of these different desires and different career choices that they're wanting to see developed in their areas?
Yes.
Go ahead.
In fact, they have a program at a couple of the mines where they offer the workers, their children, to come out and earn $20, $30, $40 an hour to help them towards their education. The other component of that is the mining equipment that they have underground. They also provide that equipment. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are sitting in our workforce area that they've donated to us to help to understand what that mining entails the Trona. They provide a lot of the electrical components that we teach our students with. So not always is it in dollar wise, but material equipment that there's no way Western Wyoming Community College could afford to have that material on site if we didn't have that in-kind donation from those plants.
Any further questions?
Yes,
All right, thank you.
thank you.
Any other public comment before we work the bill? Okay, we'll close public comment then and we'll work the bill. What's your pleasure?
The bill.
Bill moved, seconded. And I imagine we have a number of amendments to that.
Chairman.
Would you like to start off, Mr. Co-Chairman, with your amendments?
Mr. Amendment, the issue we're just talking about, page 10, line 4. This is where, in the paragraph where you've got the continuous enrollment for not less than 2 academic terms. So I would move to insert on page 10, line 4, after the year period, insert. The commission may grant individuals waivers to this subparagraph for military service, religious service, or other good cause shown pursuant to commission rules.
Okay, everybody hear that? Is there a second? Second. Seconded all over the place? Okay.
Mr.
Further
Chairman,
explanation?
we've talked about this at some length, and so the military or religious service language is copied right out of the Hathaway. And the good cause shown, other good cause shown is important here. And it's in the Hathaway provision as well. But this group may have some particular needs, given that it's older population. And some of the programs, say if you had a seasonal thing that you had to have in the fall semester, you need to take 2 sequences. It might take 2 years and you might not take anything in the spring semester. You could run into that kind of circumstance. So I think it's important to give the commission flexibility, and they can deal with it through rules, and they have successfully in the Hathaway. So.
Okay, questions for the bringer of the amendment? Question has been called. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The amendment carries. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the next one is quite simple, and then let somebody else have a crack.
Okay.
Page 11, line 18. This is on the subject matter is the 50 million trigger. Just clarifying language. Move after on page 11, line 18, after the little IV in parentheses, insert delete to this extent, insert the word if. On line 19, after is in, delete the words is in excess of, and insert has once exceeded. So the full sentence, Mr. Chairman, would read little 4, if the balance of the Wyoming Tomorrow Scholarship Endowment Fund has once exceeded $50 million. And Mr. Chairman, that is consistent with the non-codified provision at the end of the bill too.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Questions for the bringer? Okay, ready for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Amendment is carried.
Mr. Chairman, I've got 2 more in due course of time.
Okay. Next, Representative Summers.
So, Mr. Chairman, everybody received my amendment, so it's on page 7. And Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna delete from the amendment lines 1 through 4. And so basically, the only part that I'm gonna be bringing is line 5. And then I'm gonna put that in another section, the other one. So, or I'm gonna propose that. And so basically, what my amendment does on page 7 is eliminates Romanet 4. So remember, this is a student is not eligible for a scholarship under this article if the student, and then Romanet 4 is in default on a federal Title IV education loan. And I just think if this is an adult and they're in default, they may be in desperate need of a new try in life and a new job and a new career. And I don't want that provision to preclude them from being eligible. So that's my motion.
Okay, so is there a second to that motion? Second. Okay. Heard the amendment. Motion been seconded. Any discussion? Committee, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I don't have a strong feeling on this one way or another, but just for the sake of argument, it's that question of if a person is defaulted on a student loan before and has that debt, are we, in my mind, I think rewarding them with additional scholarship dollars to retrain and retool? You know, knowing that these funds are finite, I do support some limits. And I think that this is one that we could revisit in the future, but until we get this launched, I think we should avoid offering scholarships to people that have already applied, are in default of a loan, a student loan. Maybe they haven't quite demonstrated that they're ready and have their life put together as we want them to retool at a community college. So voted up, voted down, but I just wanted to offer a counter argument to the good bringer of the amendment.
Okay, yes, Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to support the amendment. I think that if you are in default on a federal student loan, that wasn't a grant, that was a loan. You were trying to get an education, things didn't go your way, you don't have the resources to pay off that debt. You're probably exactly the type of person that we need to provide some support to and get you retooled and retrained. And then hopefully at some point, maybe you'll have the opportunity to pay off that federal debt that you still have, although I know that they keep heaping the penalties on. Maybe somebody will change that policy at the federal level. It's not up to us, but we can at least provide support for those individuals. And I appreciate the bring of the amendment. I thought that was a good change.
Okay, anyone else? Any further comments from the bringer of the bill? Okay. Ready for the question? Oh, ready for the question. Question been called. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay.
No.
The amendment passes. No division? Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, the original idea I had, that is the first part of that amendment. I want to go, let me find it in the bill. I want to go to the section on preference. And I want to have this discussion. Ultimately, the body will the committee will decide. That would be page 13. So, Mr. Chairman, when I looked at this, and the reason that I'm bringing this discussion is, we kind of tailored this when the task force created this bill. We kind of tailored this for the most part after a local community college's their scholarship program. And they in fact debated this issue of, if you've got a degree, should you be eligible? Who are you trying to target? And I can see maybe it shouldn't be all one or the other, but I really would like to see us give a preference to those individuals who have not earned a degree. I think the people that have earned a degree, one, have an advantage in obtaining a degree. They likely, may or may not, but likely maybe are making more than those that don't have a degree. And I think about retooling, a lot of that is going to be certificates. It's, these folks maybe have a certificate in something else, going back to get a certificate. This doesn't jeopardize those that have a certificate. This is a degree. And so with that, I would like to add in, and I'd make a motion on page 13, and you can pick your line. And I'd let LSO, but basically a line in this section that would say preference shall be given to students without a degree. So that would be my amendment.
Okay, you've heard the amendment. Is there a second? Seconded.
Chairman,
Senator Office.
I would move to amend the amendment to say may instead of shall. I would go along with that. I'll support that and see how it goes, but I won't vote for the shall. I will vote for the may. Vote it up or vote it down.
Okay,
Friendly amendment.
Yeah, amendment on the
Friendly
amendment. Friendly?
amendment?
Okay, friendly. There we go.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Okay, Representative Overmueller.
Yes, I'm wondering how that interfaces with the earlier section on page 7, lines 13 and 14. Maybe I'm missing what the status of that is at this point, but as part of that amendment, do lines 13 and 14 need to be also part, and delete those 2 lines? Well, it goes to it because, it's, but.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr.
Representative
Chairman,
Summers.
Mr. Chairman, the current language, I didn't touch that in that last amendment. So the language would say a student is not eligible under this if the student has previously earned a baccalaureate degree or higher. So that'll still be in place, right? Because I didn't alter that.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I'm not sure I understand then how they work together, because I thought you were trying to move this idea to the preference section and get rid of this, that it would be preferable
Mr. Chairman.
for a person without a degree, but a person with a baccalaureate could still get it. They're just lower on the preference list.
Mr. Chairman,
Well, we'll have.
let me explain my
Mr.
amendment.
Okay, go ahead.
first.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I leave this in, and how it would simply work is, so this is you are not eligible if you have earned a baccalaureate degree or higher. All I'm saying in the preference section is those students who don't have a degree, you may give a preference to those students who do not have a degree. So that's a preference versus this is a prohibition for anybody with a baccalaureate degree or higher.
Okay, follow up. Mr. Overmueller first.
No, go ahead.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I think Representative Obermueller is onto something here. You can give a preference to the ones without, but it's an absolute preference. If you leave in the prohibition on giving to anybody that has a baccalaureate degree. What are we missing?
Mr. Chairman, I think it works. I guess I would ask Tanya or somebody else, but basically on page 7, on Romanet 2, there is an absolute prohibition against anybody receiving this scholarship if you've earned a baccalaureate degree or higher. So put that in this bucket here. And all I'm saying is in that bucket that's left on the bottom, we want to give a preference to those who have no degree. So, okay. So there would be those that have no degree may get a preference. So that means it'd be no degree, it would be a baccalaureate degree, and it'd be an associate's degree. And so there's your bottom bucket.
Okay. And Mr.
Go ahead.
Chairman, so if we pass this amendment as is, the baccalaureate degree will make, that cuts you out entirely. An associate's degree doesn't cut you out with his language.
Right.
So your language actually does something there, giving the people with no associate's degree a preference over those who do.
Right. Okay. Okay, everybody clear on that now? Representative Newsom, I believe you had a question a while ago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering if it would be a friendly amendment to add a preference for U.S. citizens in this amendment, or if I would need to bring that separately.
Separate. Okay. All right, any other discussion on the amendment with the friendly amendment inserted? Okay, ready for the question? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, no. Okay, the amendment is carried.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I ask that we give LSO the latitude to rewrite this particular section so that we're getting a number of these preferences. So each one of them is a separate subparagraph, and we have the standard bill drafting format of one little I, two little I, three little I. There's probably 4 or 5 little I.
Okay, you have a problem with that, Representative Summers? Okay, good idea.
Okay.
Yes, Representative Overbill.
Are you open for another amendment?
Yes, I guess we are now.
Yeah, I would like, on page 7, I would like to amend to strike lines 13 and 14. In this day and age, there are some baccalaureate degrees that are just in industries that may not be viable anymore. It's the whole idea is going back and getting some retraining. So my amendment would be to strike lines 13 and 14. Thank you.
I'll second.
So that was a motion, right? Okay, and a second, we have a second.
And Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
I think with the Summers amendment that just occurred with the May, I think you can set up a prioritization that appropriately reflects, if you've got a degree that's a highly marketable degree, you should be in one bin. But if you've got a degree that is, as Representative Obermueller is talking about, you need to be retooled. I don't think you should be ineligible for the program effectively is what it comes down to. I think prioritization at this point, and particularly as time evolves, maybe you'd want to reprioritize where this is the population that you would start trying to address. But in the early years, you'd want to address folks that don't have any degree at all. There's 2 ways to go about resolving that. One is to come back in a few years and change the legislation once we've addressed the population that Representative Summers is concerned about, and I share your concern that should be the first priority. But we've got the legislation in front of us now. And I don't know which of those is the best way, but I agree with Representative Obermueller that we should provide the flexibility for somebody that, has been in a career for, we'll say, 30 years. It's not relevant to their baccalaureate. What they want to do is get retrained in some certificate area and be marketable again.
Okay, comments, questions from the committee? Okay, sensing you're ready for the question, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay.
Aye.
The amendment carries.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
next.
Mr. Chairman, in the same section, 14, put in another subparagraph in this list we've got, would read, appropriate preference shall also be given to scholarships for specific purposes where a Wyoming employer or group of employers or community organization has agreed to provide matching funds to reduce the cost to the state for the scholarships. Mr. Chairman, I would.
Second to hear more details.
Okay, seconded.
Mr. Chairman, what it's trying to do is say if we've got, say, an employer that needs a specific workforce real bad, and they're willing to put up part of the cost to match, so we don't spend as much, we'll give that a preference because it'll make our funds go further. And if they're willing to put up that money, they really need the employees. This isn't just a request. The word appropriate is there because you need latitude to say, well, a 50% match is a lot more important than a 10% match. And because you will get different percentages. So that's what it's trying to do, is encourage industry to support this program in specific cases where they need people.
Representative Summers first.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I mean, I really like this idea, but the only part I don't like is to say that where it says save the state money. And so if you want to do that, then you got to go, I think you got to construct it a little bit differently and say of the amount, of the 88, whatever is available, a percentage, to prioritize those applicants that you get part of that money from. So I think you gotta, the 7,200, that's what you're trying to do, or if it's just a match, then obviously this is not going to pay the full meal deal on any of these. The scholarship will not pay for the entire cost of the program. So do you want to just match the scholarship amount, or do you in fact want to reduce the state share of the scholarship? And so you got to be more.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
The way it's worded, what it does speak strictly to is the state's share of the scholarship. It does not, a match that is, say, just pay living expenses, would not count for this purpose.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
We have Representative Newsom first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I had somewhat the same concern is in prior parts of this bill, we've said, here's the amount you get, period. And so this match language is confusing to me. And it also would make us rewrite that piece of here's the amount you get, but if you get a match, then you get less. So we would have to rework that piece. And I guess I'm not in favor of that.
Mr. Chairman.
Respond for that, Mr. Co-Chairman.
If there's going to be concerns about that, I can leave this amendment off and bring it in committee in the session, where I've got time to work on. the
What's your
language.
preference? You want to withdraw?
I think maybe we'll
Okay.
withdraw that.
Amendment's been withdrawn.
And
We're open for another amendment.
Mr. Chairman, do have another one.
Okay.
Page 14 at the bottom. This would be a new sentence in section 2116-1906. Would read, the Community College Commission shall limit the number and amount of scholarships awarded so that the expected expenditures do not exceed the funding available, comma, considering the total duration of the awards. So that the commission, Mr. Chairman, that's the proposed amendment. What it would do is tell the commission, make a projection of how much you're going to spend, award that based on the projection. And then if the projection proves to be a little wrong, you still have the language of the pro rata reduction. But this would keep the pro rata reduction pretty limited if the projections are confident, and I think they would be. You don't want to just say, didn't want to put an absolute in here because otherwise, if you do that, they may say, well, then we can only award a number that would, if they took the maximum they could use. And that would be too limiting. This allows them some flexibility to make an honest projection and a fallback if they're a little wrong.
Okay, you've heard the amendment. Comments or questions for the bringer? Yes, Representative Obermuller.
Just repeat the amendment for me, please, just the way it's
sure.
worded.
Go ahead.
It's a new sentence in the section that begins at the bottom of page 14. So it would come in before the sentence on the top of page 15. The Community College Commission, well, I guess it's just the commission. Is it defined as? Okay, the commission shall limit the number and amount of scholarships awarded so that the expected expenditures do not exceed the funding available, comma, considering the total duration of the awards. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Office.
Senator Scott, would you want that to be projected funding available as opposed to funding available? Or not?
I don't have strong feelings. Do you?
Mr. Chairman, I think projected funding available might be more accurate if somebody's going to try and get into the technical aspect of it.
Friendly amendment?
Friendly amendment.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Representative
Mr.
Harsh.
Chairman, and I appreciate this amendment. I've got another one that'll establish a spending policy, and it's really kind of a belt and suspenders approach. So this is the belt, not bring the suspenders next. So I agree. I think we all vote for this.
Okay,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I just had one question on the number and amount of scholarship, and we're defining the amount. So I'm curious why you put that additional word in there.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
because we have defined the maximum amount, but particularly if you're funding some one-year certificate programs, a lot of them will not approach that maximum amount. So you've got to consider not only the number of scholarships, but how much you think each one's going to cost. And you'll get some experience and say, well, half of them are going to be one-year certificate programs or something. And that will affect the projections you make.
Okay with that? Anyone else? Okay, sensing you're ready to vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, nay. Amendment carries. Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members on page 5 propose an amendment, Mr. Chairman, and it would be on line 21 and really would put a new paragraph into this section. So we'd renumber the existing language as A, but would put a spending policy in this. And really in our discussion, there is no spending policy in this, and we really probably need one, much like the higher ed endowment scholarship. So, Mr. Chairman, I would just propose that we copy the language. It's in 94719O, and I would ask staff to read that to insert this as a new paragraph B. And I think we're ready.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, the language reads for the annual spending policy amount for the Excellence in Higher Education Endowment is as follows. An amount equal to 5% of the previous 5-year average market value of the endowment fund as calculated from the first day of the fiscal year.
Okay, and I'm assuming that's a motion to.
Mr. Chairman,
accept
that's
that
my
language.
motion, and that's just standard language. Thank you.
Okay, moved and seconded. Questions or discussion from the committee? Did you have, Mr. Co-Chairman?
I think the 5% amount may be problematic, and may be problematic where it is statute. But I would prefer, Mr. Chairman, rather than debate that at this point, to pass this amendment as proposed and in committee, look to see is 5% still appropriate, or is the world changed, so 4.5% or something different.
Yeah,
I think,
Mr. Chairman.
I think it's a debate we need to have, but we need to have it better informed than we can do right now.
Okay, Matt?
Mr. Chairman, I would just ask for latitude from LSO, since this would be a 5-year average, depending on the first year wouldn't be a 5-year average. Allow us to phase this in. The first year would be based on the first year, second year would be based on the previous 2 years.
That's the next part of my amendment. Yeah, that's right. That's
Okay, that's understood, I guess, in that. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, for the bringer of the amendment, why 5 and not 3? Because
Go
it
ahead.
changes the money drastically.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think, 5% has been pretty standard spending policy for our state. And when you put in the 5-year rolling average, it's not 5%, it's really 4% because you're taking a moment in time. And that's really the key. And I think, your cap finance committee is looking at that 5-year rolling average as well. It's probably too conservative, frankly. I think, when you basically have a 4% spending policy and we're getting 2.64% off dividends and interest. But that's a debate for another time and another deal. So I think 5% of the 5-year rolling average is a very conservative number.
Okay. Everyone clear on the amendment? All right. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are you anticipating that then the rest of the bill will be conformed to that referred to the 50 million, and some of that will go away and LSO will just clean out those pieces up to conform, or?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And I think some of that's in non-codified, so it will go away. And then I have another amendment, if this is adopted, to put some more language in the non-codified to make sure it all works in that build-up period.
And just that number, theoretically, if we ended up with $50 million as a stable award with 7,200 awarded, gets you around 350 fully funded scholarships a year once you're tracking continuously. It's pretty darn good. So,
Representative Harshman?
Mr. Chairman, and my hope is that eventually we would appropriate the 100 million that we talked about. And then I think also when the appropriation happens, I think it's important, whoever does it, whatever committee it happens in, also fill up the reserve account, that 9%. And then we can get working on it right away. And then it's not this period of uncertainty. And with a 9% reserve account, really you have, even if you had zero return, you've really got a couple of years of fully funded, and you can start to make adjustments. It gives you some time. And that's really been our history. We haven't had a big enough reserve account, and the timing issues. First was a higher ed endowment. And we learned that, we changed that reserve account. With the Hathaway also, the Hathaways had no problems. I mean, it's gone from 400 million to now nearly 800 million. But it has this timing issue that we're proposing to fix. So we don't have to draw into a reserve account. Not to get into the weeds on this, but I think we've learned as we've gone on. And I think this time in the 9% reserve with that, and then just having one account, not having all these tips back and forth, will serve us well and serve the state and the people well.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Questions for the bringer of the bill? All right, sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The amendment carries. And you had a follow-up to
Mr.
that?
Chairman, yeah, and I think, Mr. Chairman, and we'd need some grace with LSO staff, and I talked to them at the break, but really would be in the non-codified section 4 of this bill. Really need 2 issues solved, and you've spoken about both of them. The first really is the first year, because you're only going to have one cohort of students. And if it is 5% of 100 million, that'd be 650, 70 students. Well, you don't need the full amount. And then as that rolls into the second year, and then it's fully funded. So there needs to be some language really I have really 2 paragraphs in the non-codified section 4. So one is the first year, the spending policy would be 2.5%. Going to spend no more than that, and that'd be half of the 5. Another paragraph in non-codified then would be this roll-in that Mr. Wilmar talked about. The first year can't be a 5-year rolling average. The second year can't be a 5-year. And so it would just continue those averages years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and beyond. And they'll be able to work that language out. So that's my proposed amendments. The section 4, last page of the bill, really.
Okay, is everyone clear on the amendment? You'd like to have it restated, or are we okay with it?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I'm a little nervous about far without seeing the language. Okay, just the 2.5. First year, that will give us the placeholder in the bill. Take us into do you want to try and concept to cover the whole thing at this point?
Representative Harshman?
Mr. Chairman, I think so. 2 concepts. The first part of the amendment is the first year where you just have one cohort, 1 year of students. And so you don't want to expend 5% and then have to spend 10% the next year that you don't have. And so you want to limit that first year to really 2.5%. That's the number, half of 5. And then that'd be the first year, and that goes away. We wouldn't want that in the green books, I don't think, non-codified. So that's the first paragraph, and that'd be like a paragraph B in that non-codified. And then the paragraph C would be then, it says now that we just adopted on the 5% of the 5-year rolling average. But there needs to be some language on those years 1 through 4. That'd be the first year would be the first year, second year would be the 2-year rolling average, the third year, the 3-year rolling average, because you don't have a 5-year rolling average. That's all I was trying to do is there's a question mark in there and to really take the question out.
Mr. Chairman, I think that would probably work.
Okay.
And we can look at it. in committee.
And that's really, Mr. Chairman, that's not, I mean, that's working with staff trying to figure this out. So it wasn't. Yeah.
Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is the language up to 2.5%?
Mr. Chairman, not more than 2.5%.
Not more than, thank you.
Okay, is everyone clear on the amendment? Any further questions? Sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Amendment carries.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go
I've
ahead.
got a couple more if I can.
Might as well. We're on this end of the table. We might as
Your
well roll.
indulgence. Mr. Chairman, I'll just start flipping pages. The next is on page 7. And it was really off of Director Cooley's comments and would be on line 4, page 7. And you can read that Romanet 4. The student agrees to register with the Department of Workforce Service for applicable training assistance. And then I would put just a comma as defined by rule of the commission. And then I'm referring to this bill in 1905, in 2116, 1905B. That's on page 13. Rulemaking is in this bill. And so it just refers that for sure that registering is going to be defined in this bill.
Second.
Okay, been moved and seconded.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes,
to
go
say
ahead.
That takes
Representative
care of
Cummings.
the issue that I had earlier. Perfectly. Thank you.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Co-Chair.
so the commission is making rules.
Mr. Chairman, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any other comments or questions for the bringer of the bill, bringer of the amendment? Okay, sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The amendment is carried. Representative Harshman, you have another one, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, I think the committee took care of most of those, good teamwork on this, just on page 13 on these, on preferences. And it's page 13, line 18. And you see after the period where it says preference may be given to students who already are under the scholarship have received it. And I guess my thought, I'd like to make two changes to this section and really say that's the first preference. And so the amendment would read, Mr. Chairman, on line 18, and LSO might wordsmith it, but first, insert the word first preference shall be given to students who receive the scholarship under this article immediately preceding academic term. And then, Mr. Chairman, the second part of the amendment would be on line 21, where it says after the period preference, it would be second preference shall also be given to students with the longest period of Wyoming residency. So instead of, those two are going to stand out above all others preferences. That's what I'm trying to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, can we separate those?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. I'll withdraw and just make that first amendment.
We don't even have a second yet, so.
I'll second.
Okay. So the first amendment, Mr. Chairman, would be that first preference shall be given to students who've already received the scholarship or under the scholarship. That's my first amendment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Question to the sponsor. Would that be construed that you get a scholarship for one purpose, one term?
Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, you know, I don't know. That's, I mean, it's probably a lot of scenarios you go through, but I guess my thing is, I'm just thinking of a person who's under this scholarship working, and now we don't have enough money for some reason. Yeah, I'd like to finish them, is what I.
Mr. Chairman, I think Chairman Scott's,
Go ahead.
I think Chairman Scott's question relates to something we might have as an eligibility gap. I don't remember us saying you can't have this twice.
Yeah, I don't think it's in there. I just thought.
Yeah, so I think we just have to go back and amend that in, and that would take care of that concern, but it's a broader concern.
Okay. Question's been called for. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. The amendment carries. Okay, you have
Mr.
another
Chairman,
one? Go
The
ahead.
second amendment would be then on line 21 after period and would simply say the second preference shall be. And this is always a, you know, it's always a hard thing. And we see it in our WWAMI and our witchy programs, see it with hunting licenses. I mean, so, you know, you got two residents who want to do this. One has moved here 1 year, one here's been here a lifetime. I don't know. It's not an easy one. And so, but I thought, I know how I feel about it. So that's why I brought the amendment. So.
It has now been seconded. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm thinking about this. I didn't know if we should go down this path of creating the tier for the commission. But if you look on line 15, it says the rules, and I can't remember if we changed this to a may, but it says the rules shall provide for preference to award scholarships, which considers workforce shortages and economic development. So if we start doing this tiered and ranking and telling the commission how we want it ranked, where does that piece fit in? That, to me, if we're going to say the first preference shall be given to, that's the part I'm struggling with, is now it doesn't make sense to me. Because we have a first one, then we say the first preference, then a second. What is that? What is 15 and 17, those lines? How do those fit in this tier?
Hirschman.
Mr. Chairman, on this amendment, you know, and Senator, I agree. And frankly, I'd like to change that shall on line 15 to a may, but I didn't go there. But since you asked, but I'm not going to make that amendment, but I just think these two things are very strong. You're already in the program. We've adopted that as committee. The second one is we have a limited number and we're down to the final deal, and Is it who applied first, or is it who's been here for the longest?
Senator Rothfuss, I think you were first, and
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And this is an amendment I was contemplating discussing the second half of the consecutive concept and immediately preceding presents us with problems, I think, particularly when you're talking about workforce. We had an earlier discussion about trying to bring people back to Wyoming. We put this in, you'll never bring a single person back to Wyoming if you leave proceeding and you give it the highest priority. You've assured that anybody who's been here for 7 consecutive minutes beforehand is in a better position than somebody that graduated from high school here, spent 30 years of their life here, and then was driven out of the workforce and had to move to another state to keep their family fed. So if we want to go this route and we want to have preference to folks that have been in Wyoming, I think we need to take off the immediately preceding application for a scholarship under this article at a minimum. So I'd suggest that as an amendment to the amendment. I'll make that motion to remove immediately preceding application for a scholarship under this article, so that it does recognize that you can have lived in Wyoming for 25 years. That's meaningful, but then you've lived the last 8 months somewhere else because you didn't have employment.
Chairman, I think that's friendly amendment.
Okay.
friendly amendment?
Thank you.
Okay. Second
Second
accepts
agree.
that, I'm assuming. Okay. Further comments, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, on and against the amendment. Mr. Chairman, I see two problems with this amendment. Part of this is moved to where preference given longest. That's the way that's written. But I don't think that's what we want to do.
I think Representative Newsom was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just a little confused with Senator Rothfuss where that is in the bill, what he's referencing. Thank you.
Yeah, to clarify that, Mr. Chairman, as you see at the bottom of page 13 on to 14, where the suggested amendment by Representative Harshman is preference shall, or second preference shall also be given to students with the longest period of Wyoming residency. My suggestion was to strike the remainder of the sentence, immediately preceding application for a scholarship under this article. There's actually still a conflicting provision up above that I'll go back and revisit, but the friendly amendment was to strike immediately preceding application for a scholarship under this article, so that there's flexibility of residency. Hope that clarifies.
Okay, are you okay now with that? Okay, Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my comment just is that it seems to be going in the opposite direction than the working group that on page 6, in terms of eligibility, changed the last year's working group requiring a residency of 3 years down to 1 year, wanting to make it more available. And it's just going in that opposite direction. I understand that it's just a preference in the later section, but it does go against the idea early on that we wanted to get folks who had moved here and we want to keep them here. So I'll probably be a no.
Okay, anyone else? Everyone understand the amendment? Question's been called. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay.
No.
Chair is in doubt. All in favor, raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. All opposed? 1, 2. The,
Hey, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, can I follow up real quick on that?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Senator Office.
So, Mr. Chairman, it's left the way it was originally, which still includes the immediately preceding application for a scholarship under this article. So I would simply move to strike immediately preceding application for a scholarship under this article on line 13 on to 14, so that pursuant to rule and regulation, they can give some thought to the fact that you may have moved away and come back.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion, questions for the bringer? Okay, sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. That amendment is passed. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not making a motion, but I'm hoping that some bigger thinkers are going to come up with something. But along that thinking of the longest period, we don't want to create an incentive for senior citizens to be doing this when we're trying to maybe retrain a younger workforce. So I think what we're trying to get after is we want some kind of demonstrated time that you've been in Wyoming that would give you a little bit of a bump compared to someone who just moved here. Going back to the 1 year, our thought was we're trying to not just balance the needs of the student, but balance the needs of the community. So, in my community, if we have, a manufacturing company come, they need a certain set of skilled workers. It is a bit of a barrier if we say, well, we only want those people who've lived here for 3 years. And so that's why we changed it to 1. But I do want to recognize that there might be, certainly people that have lived here longer are more invested in the state. I understand that too. So maybe I'm just thinking out loud of like given to students with at least 3-year residency in Wyoming or something along those lines, but I'm kind of throwing that out there, not as a motion, but if anyone wants to throw out a concept in the form of a motion, maybe we can tighten that piece up.
Okay. I don't see any action. Maybe that could take place at a later time, perhaps clear that up. Unless you would like to move an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that a preference may be also given on the bottom of page 13, lines 21 through 22, and I could use some LSO wordsmithing. Preference may be also given to students who have resided in Wyoming for at least 5 years.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion, questions for the bringer? Yes, Senator Roth.
I understand the concept, and I think adding more flexibility as opposed to being prescriptive is probably the way to go, where we say something along the lines of preference may also be given to students based on their Wyoming residency or the extent of their Wyoming residency, based on the extent of their Wyoming residency. That's how it probably should be. At that point, you can cap it, you could set standards, they can do whatever the heck they want, and we don't have to go with like 5 years as a magic number.
I think that's a friendly amendment. I'd
Okay.
go with that.
I like that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if we could have that repeated, was that a recension of the original amendment who have resided in 5 years? This is a replacement for that language. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
That sounds.
So preference may also be given to students based on the length of their Wyoming residency or based on the extent of their Wyoming residency. You can wordsmith that, whichever works better.
Okay, is everyone clear on that? LSO, you okay? All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Co-Chair Scott, look like you're puzzled here.
Yeah, Mr. President, I have reservations about this. I think it's a little too vague and delegating too much. We ought to. I'd much prefer 1 year, but or to remove the preference this preference entirely, but whatever the committee wants.
Okay. Further questions, comments? Okay, sensing you're ready for the question, all in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay.
No.
Chair is in doubt. All in favor, please raise your hand. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All opposed? Amendment carries.
Mr. Chairman, one more on that topic.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to conform a little bit back on page 6, sorry to jump backwards, but it's the same concept. Page 6, lines 13 through 15. One of the requirements for the program is the student has demonstrated Wyoming residency for not less than 1 year immediately preceding application. I would move to strike immediately preceding application.
okay. Is there a second to the amendment? Second. Seconded. Everyone clear on what we're voting on here? Representative Summers first.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm going to vote against this one. I think you should have been here a year. You know, you can move back, but if, I mean, yeah, okay, you moved away and you come back 2 months, and I think you should at least show some residency, even if you've had prior residency. So I'm not in favor of this amendment.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So it wouldn't happen that way, though. That's the problem. If you've gone and you've gotten a job in another state, but you want to come back to Wyoming and you want to be retrained, you're not going to come back to Wyoming without a job and then spend the first year untrained and then apply for the program. What you're going to want to do is be able to say, hey, I want to go back to Wyoming. There's that program. I'm going to get an education. I'm going to go back home again. We heard from, and we had a discussion about the fact that this could be a way for us to recruit some of our people back into the state that we've lost over the years. If you have that language, and I'm welcome to other suggestions on how to achieve it, but if you have this language, you do not accomplish that objective. And I think that's a worthy objective of it. So if there's another way to accomplish that objective, I'm game. I don't know how to with that language there. I think you just rule out people that we'd like to be able to help, in my opinion. Again, somebody may have lived here for 25 years of their life. 1 month away. They live somewhere else for 1 month. You can't come home again. And it seems like we're doing ourselves a little disservice.
Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the bill started at 3 years at this spot. And, you know, for various reasons, but to go to 1 year, but then now to open it up, I think, you know, I could support that, but I would want to probably take that back to like 2 or 3 years. So, so I would like to amend the amendment to change the 1 back to 3. And then, you know, continue with the immediately preceding. So the person's had some Wyoming connections, been a resident here before and moved away.
And
Okay, you heard the.
Mr. Chairman, I'd call that a friendly amendment.
Okay.
If that's the key to getting it, because again, the nexus to Wyoming is the important thing. The nexus didn't have to occur last week. It just has to have happened.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Friendly amendment? Yes.
Just on and against the amendment, I think, you know, again, we are setting up something we haven't seen before. And this scholarship, you know, we all have, I think, a vision of who might apply for it. You know, is the intended purpose to bring workforce development to communities? Is it to get degrees in the hands of people who have never been to college? Is it to reskill people who have been to college but had a degree and want to come back? I mean, we're looking at different population segments. And so in my thinking, you know, it was more, how do we have people that are here in Wyoming, giving them the skills? And so some of that is a balancing act with what are the needs of the community. As I mentioned in the example, if you got a manufacturing firm coming and they need a certain skilled workforce, you know, how do we find the bodies to do that? So it's a bit of a balancing act. You know, when we were working on this, I didn't realize we were working on a bill to bring people back home. I just think we're straying a little too far outside of what we were trying to accomplish. Worthy discussions, but to me, I think we're starting to lose the mission and focus of why we were working on this bill, which was to also benefit Wyoming residents who are here. So on and against the amendment this year, if we want to revisit in the future, that'd be something I'd be willing to look at, though.
Okay. Further comments, discussion?
Chairman?
Yes.
You know, I
Representative
think as we listen to the discussion here, I think we really have 2 problems we're trying to solve in 1 paragraph, and maybe it'd take 2 paragraphs. The one is you know, you should be here a year, like the good majority floor leader said, and not be And the other is, what about the person we want to get back to Wyoming? And, you know, so maybe it's some of both, you know? If this fails, maybe there's a way to just add another paragraph for those folks who come back and really solve both these issues.
Okay, so what do we want to do? Senator Office, did you have a?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just as another possibility, I think Representative Harshman's suggestion is a good one. It could simply be an or clause as well. The student has demonstrated Wyoming residency for not less than 1 year immediately preceding application or had prior residency in the state for not less than 3 years, or has had prior residency in the state for not less than 3 years.
Okay, is that a friendly
Yeah,
amendment?
if everyone, I don't know who seconded it, but if that's friendly, we'll just call it good.
Okay.
Like that better.
All
Okay,
right.
let's do it.
Sometimes it takes us a while to invent this airplane we're flying, but, okay, any other comments, questions? Everyone clear on what they're voting on? Yes, go ahead.
Perhaps we just say that one more time so everybody knows and people who are watching.
Okay, go ahead.
So leaving the paragraph is currently the student has demonstrated Wyoming residency for not less than 1 year immediately preceding application. It would be adding comma, or has had prior residency or has had prior Wyoming residency for not less than 3 years, or has had prior Wyoming residency for not less than 3 years.
Okay, everyone clear on that? LSO, we okay with that? All right. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay.
No.
Amendment carries. Okay, Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, I just have one final, it's just a small one on the reporting.
Okay.
And let me get to that. It's page 14, members. And as I read through the reporting requirements, the one that I would be interested in that is not in here is really the number in each type of degrees that are rewarded. And I don't, that's not saying it right, but where I put it in, Mr. Chairman, was line 13 after the period. And just added another sentence, the number of students in each type of degree. Something, maybe there's a better way to word it, but basically I'd like to know our
Second.
so.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Chairman, if you say degree, you don't get the report on the certificates. So you need a little broader language.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I think we could give LSO that, we want to know what kids are studying and how many of them are studying. That's really, and so I'd give LSO that latitude, and that's a good catch, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay, moved and seconded. Questions been called. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Amendment carries. Representative Obermueller.
Proposed amendment, Mr. Chairman, on line 18 of page 11. By bringing this amendment, perhaps I will learn something about how these cakes are baked, but this goes to the spending policy discussion earlier and how that was set up. And line 18 has been amended. And so it currently reads, if the balance of Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Endowment Fund has once exceeded $50 million. And it's that sentence that that I will amend and change the word balance to the value, so that it doesn't require actually funding to 50 million. It just, the balance itself has to be valued at 50 million. So put 10 million in, but now the value is 50 million and that triggers it. So that's my amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, everyone clear on that? Discussion? Sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. Amendment carries. Probably should move down to the other end of the table. Yes, Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 13, back to the preferences, I would like to add a preference to US citizens. And that would be a shall.
Would you repeat that again, please?
Preference shall be given to US citizens.
Okay.
Second.
Is there a second? Okay. Everyone clear on that?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Co-Chair.
on and against the amendment. I think that where you have a lawful immigrant, and I'm thinking particularly right now in the current context of people with sometimes considerable training and ability coming in from a place like Afghanistan, where they've been a big help to the US, you're going to rule those lawful immigrants that may need our help and may be very good recruits for our workforce out with this amendment, and I'm against it.
Okay, anyone else?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I am not ruling them out. They are still eligible. They just don't have a preference.
Okay. Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Page 7, C Romanet 3 already provides a condition that a student is not eligible for a scholarship under this article if the student, Romanet 3, is not a United States citizen or a permanent resident alien who meets the definition of an eligible non-citizen under federal Title IV requirements. So the effect of this would be, as I understand it, simply to create two categories where United States citizens would be prioritized over eligible non-citizens under federal Title IV requirements. And yeah, I don't feel that we should be supporting that discrimination, honestly, through our program either, or setting a prioritization there. I'd be uncomfortable with that.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm nervous about adding too many preferences because then they start swallowing the whole rule. I mean, another thing I thought about was a preference for, military members. There are lots of a preference for displaced energy workers. I think we could start, these are all population segments that are important to us. I do worry that once we start adding too many preferences, then they don't mean anything anymore, or they're really hard to categorize. So for that reason, I think that the limitation that Senator Rothfuss just mentioned is adequate. And so for that reason would be a no.
Okay. Response. Okay, question's been called. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Nay. Amendment fails. Okay.
Question on the bill.
We got other amendments down here. We've been working this side of the aisle too much. We got to go on the other side over here. Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 8, my amendment would be to delete line 6.
Second.
Okay, that's which is incarcerated, the
Yeah, thank you.
incarcerated part. Okay,
And Mr. Chairman, if I may.
go ahead.
First, this is one of the suggestions from the Wyoming Community College for amendments. I think we got that memo from Dr. Caldwell. But also, this is something that the committees have talked about a couple of times, and I think it is a policy decision. I'm first to recognize that all people incarcerated haven't been convicted. I mean, that's the first thing to recognize. And then beyond that, the understanding that people who are in jail or prison, honestly, for the most part, are young adults who have done bad things. But in all honesty, they will be getting out and coming back to their home communities and working in their own communities and wanting to prevent recidivism. Then probably the number one way is through education and good jobs. And so why would we limit them? And when we also know that there are some programs both at the community colleges and at UW that have recognized that and have a pathways from prison kind of curriculum now. So let's encourage this rather than in some ways limit it. So I think it's a reasonable policy choice for us to kind of be discussing this.
Is there anything in there that prohibits if you have been incarcerated and are not now incarcerated? So it's only for the way this reads right now without the amendment is that if you were incarcerated, you're automatically disqualified, right? And so, and what you're trying to do is remove that from consideration, right? Okay.
Thank you. Yep, for both of those, Mr. Chairman. And it's honestly, again, people are in jail without being convicted. And also that when we get folks that are getting near the end of their 5 or 8 year sentence, wouldn't this be perfect? We can
Okay,
figure it out.
is there a second? Okay. All right, discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Co-Chair.
I've been one of those who tried to remove quite a number of the prohibitions we've had on disqualifying people for having been convicted of felonies. But I think this is one step too far. I think if they're currently incarcerated, they need to essentially get out of jail. They may need a little time to clean up their act, and then they're appropriate. In this economy, where we're as short as we are of workers, we're not having any trouble finding employment for people who are incarcerated in our community corrections programs. They can find a job and earn a living for a little while to be. So that we have a little time to make sure we're giving this to people who are going to really deserve it. I think this is taking it one step too far.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, Representative Newsom.
So this is more of a practical question and maybe for our community colleges or UW, do we currently have the ability to have incarcerated individuals enrolled?
Would you like to comment on that? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Ben Moritz, Deputy Director, Wyoming Community College Commission. We checked on this over the last couple of days leading up to this. 2 of our colleges do have programs where they can work with incarcerated individuals. Eastern Wyoming College and Central Wyoming College. I got confirmation from Eastern Wyoming College that funding for them would not be required. They do not currently charge tuition because Pell Grants and various other forms do cover that. I don't have confirmation from Central Wyoming College yet, but those are the 2 instances that would answer your question as far as do incarcerated individuals, would they actually need funding to pursue some sort of certificate or degree? And they can at those 2 institutions.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
Anyone
Chairman,
else? Yes.
just on and against the amendment, again, we're just straying off some of the mission of what we're trying to accomplish, which is getting a workforce going. We have an incarcerated person, I agree, like education's important, but are they, what's the term of their sentence? If they're going to be in prison for 10 years and we have workforce needs now, I just don't see the marrying of it. I think it's a worthy conversation for a future day, but for the purposes of standing up a scholarship today that we can always, and we'll be fine tuning in the future, maybe we can revisit that. But I just think we're starting to stray a little too far out of the purpose of what the scholarship's trying to achieve.
Okay, anyone else? Yes. Senator Gisels.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, on and against as well. I'd like to see this bill pass. This will put it in doubt in the Senate.
Okay, anyone else?
Chairman?
Yes,
If I
go
may have
ahead.
a last word, that in all honesty, by not including something, I'm not sure individuals would start thinking about it. All this does is that it doesn't make it an automatic prohibition. It allows for the commission with its rules and regs under page 13 to be able to make those kinds of preferences. But an automatic prohibition takes out a population that we have been talking about that we need to address. So I'm in favor.
Okay, any further comments? Question's been called. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay? Nay. The amendment is not passed. All right. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Senator
Did anyone
Ruffins.
down there have anyone? I'm sorry. Okay. There's two unresolved issues that have come up. One is eligibility a second time for this, which if we want to take care of that, we can simply add it to the ineligibility list that we were just on, which I moved away from inexplicably. There we go. The eligibility list begins on page 7. You see paragraph, the student is not eligible for a scholarship under this article if the student, so I would move to add on page 8, a Romanet 7 has previously received an award under this act, but then give flexibility to LSO to ensure that that language does not deny those that are currently using it. It needs to be a separate award. And I want to make sure that they have the flexibility to ensure that it's a separate award as opposed to.
Second.
Okay, been
That
moved
kind of
and
word.
seconded. Discussion. Question's been called. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The amendment carries.
Mr. Chairman, the second unresolved issue is we have semester hours and we have credit bearing hours. So this gets to one of the concerns that was expressed by the commission. Bottom of page 3, definition of semester hour means each non-remedial semester hour attempted for credit toward a degree or certificate. We understand that many of these programs are not effectively credit bearing hours. They're non-credit courses. The suggestion was to use the term clock hour. And it would have to be a new definition, which clock hour means each semester hour attempted toward a degree or certificate. And then substitute clock hour instead of semester hour throughout the legislation. And that should take care of it. And then again, I'd provide flexibility in the motion to LSO to conform. But the idea being, this is not necessarily intended to be all degree programs, as I understand it, that we're intending certificate programs. Those certificate programs are not credit hour bearing, and this entire thing was written based on the assumption that it was only credit hours for the courses. So that would be my motion, at least to fulfill the interests of what the commission expressed.
Okay, been moved and seconded. Discussion. Everyone clear on what you're voting on? With some discretion given to LSO? Okay, question's been called. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. The amendment carries. Any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman?
Wow. Oh, we got one.
Mr. Chairman, just a question for the bringer of the last amendment. When you read that term non-remedial, I mean, I understand that in the context of Hathaway, but we just like a little, before we leave this definition, is there some value in recognizing that if these are students that really weren't college bound and now are trying to retool and maybe need some remedial coursework? You live in the space of higher ed, so I'm curious if you have concerns about that.
Senator Office.
Mr. Chairman, I was under the impression that I glossed or that I skipped the word non-remedial when I read it. I intended to for that purpose. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, okay. All right. What's your pleasure on the bill? Yes.
I would point out on page 19, section 3, we've got a token appropriation here, $1,000. I asked yesterday for the committee to put the thinking cap on this issue. Feedback I've heard is that the better strategy is to leave it with the token appropriation at this point. We'll have much better knowledge of how much is available after the January Craig report. And so when we meet, so we can adjust those appropriately in committee. I think that's probably the better strategy. But I wanted to point out that we've got it here and I hope the other two bills will conform.
Okay, any other comments on that particular issue? You seem to be in agreement, Mr. Co-Chair. All right, are we ready to vote? Yep. Roll call.
On 22 LSO 0107 as amended, Senator Brightman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Representative Brown did leave a proxy aye vote. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Obermueller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Scott.
Aye.
Chairman Paxton.
Aye.
13 aye, 1 no.
Looks like the next item on our agenda is consideration of the Wyoming Community College Investment Fund. And keeping in mind that we have been invited to a luncheon at 12 o'clock. I think we can probably get started on this bill and then we'll probably recess at 12, exactly at 12 o'clock and come back and finish whatever we have to do, assuming that it's going to take a while on this bill. So, Tanya, are you prepared to present the bill to us?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, you have before you 22 LSO 108 working draft 0.6. This is the Wyoming Community College Investment Fund bill. You did see this at your last committee meeting, and you also tasked a working group with looking at this to make some amendments. And I think your co-chairman Scott has a couple of amendments on it that he'll discuss. I won't belabor discussion given that there's a short amount of time, but I would just note that it creates essentially two accounts, the Wyoming Community College State Aid Expenditure Account, as well as the Wyoming Community College Special Projects Expenditure Account, allocating 50% of the revenue off of the endowment account created in this bill as well. Both of those sections, the Wyoming Community College State Aid Expenditure Account and the Special Projects Expenditure Account, are subject to legislative appropriation. So there's no automatic fund for the community college created as a result of this act. Also provides on page 3 lines 12 through 23, and then on to page 4 lines 1 and 2. These are the reporting requirements associated with those funds. Some of this language mirrors what you've seen in the last bill that you considered with regard to creation of the accounts, as well as the Hathaway. If you note on page 4, beginning on line 4, these are the provisions amending existing statute to conform to creation of the Wyoming Community College Investment Fund. And again, a conforming amendment on page 5, lines 11 and 12. On page 5, lines 14 through 17, this is the transfer of $100 million from the general fund to begin funding this particular program. This act on page 5, line 19 is effective July 1st of 2022. Fairly straightforward bill, Mr. Chairman, subject to your questions.
Questions or comments from the committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So did I miss it, or I don't see really a spending policy? This seems to spend every nickel that's generated every year.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, it's not that you would spend every dime. It is subject to legislative appropriation. But there's no spending
There's
policy
no
appoint.
method to grow the corpus, really, like we have in our other permanent funds, where we have tips over the spending policy.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Co-Chair?
Mr. Chairman, I will have an amendment on the appropriation because this is 100 million. And if we're going to do, I think we need to do as we did in the other one, a token appropriation. So I'll have that amendment, and then I'll have serve notice. I'll have another one that's been distributed. That what it does is remove the special projects. I'll explain that, but basically the thought is this is needed to help us with the basic operating funds. Special projects we can do as we get one-time surpluses.
Okay. Yes, Senator Biden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Co-chairman semi-answered my question, but do we even have 100 million in the general fund to appropriate? I don't think we ever have that much money laying around in the general fund, do we?
Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead.
In response to that, the current estimates that I'm hearing from members of the Appropriations Committee that I think in part are based on the Craig reports is it may well, these surplus of one-time funds that are available may well exceed $1 billion. But there's a good deal of uncertainty in that because it depends on the national administration jacking up energy prices faster than it restricts our drilling. So there's more than a little uncertainty there. That's one of the reasons for going with the token appropriation. Get this set up. This one, there is some possibility with some of the federal things that are being looked at of using some federal funds either directly or by replacing general fund with federal fund. I have no idea whether those are going to come to pass, but that's another possibility with this particular program.
Okay, other questions for Tanya? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to address that question briefly, during this current year where we've received additional revenue, money that would otherwise be sitting in the general fund, which is roughly $660 million, has been transferred back through the budget reserve account and then from there into the LISRA account. So those general fund dollars that you're referring to are currently residing in the LSRA. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And on in support of the bill, I'm fine with the amendments reducing the 100 million. What I will say though is, basically the information I have is we're going to have probably 1.2 billion in one-time money. And I think it's appropriate for us in the state of Wyoming to look at where we want to invest that. And I like the idea of putting this money in endowments where you spin off income rather than you create programs that can't be sustained. So, I think if we look at the long-term investment in Wyoming, you can pick where you want to do it. You can pick water, you can pick a whole bunch of things, but I think how do we move Wyoming forward? We certainly have a need in the community college area to have more sustainable funding. And so I think it's certainly a worthy effort of ours as we move into this session to figure out how we can get this done.
Okay, questions or comments for Tanya? Okay, thanks. We're going to open up for public comment. I think we'll start with the community college folks. I'm sure you have something to say about this.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, my name is Erin Taylor. I'm representing the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. I want to just say, of course, we support this bill. You know that. This has been a top priority for the community colleges for several years, sustainable funding. So this bill, however, the funding ends up, because we all know there's a lot of nuances with how things might shake out. This opens the door to give us a tool for sustainable funding and taking us there. But I want to just walk you through really quickly and remind the committee of why we've been talking about this. And this year, the chairman have indulged us and given us the opportunity to educate your committee about the history of the cuts that the community colleges have sustained over the last 10 years. We've walked through that with the Community College Commission folks and shown you how that the cuts in that state aid amounted to $94 million over the last 10 years. Add on to that, community colleges, unlike other institutions or state agencies, have also had to sustain cuts to when local mill levies are on the reduction. And I think those might actually be on the decline again this year. So that might be another pot of money that will hurt the community colleges. We've also been able to educate the committee on the sustainable funding work that's happened over the last couple of years. 2 years ago, over the interim, there was an ask from the Appropriations Committee to the Community College Commission. Okay, well, give us some ideas for sustainable funding. And the commission got to work, and we put together, through a lot of smart people in the community college space, an entire report that I have right here. And we've walked you through this, what this is, some of the sustainable funding recommendations could include. There was also a legislative committee who was tasked to look at sustainable funding and governance for the community colleges. Arguably one of the best and most robust committees that I've had the pleasure to be a part of in my tenure with the community colleges was that select committee. The result that came out of that committee ended up being a bill to create yet another community college, which is great. We support that. However, we didn't have anything that resulted in sustainable funding for the community colleges. So I'm just kind of walking through a little bit of the history. We've walked you through the nuances of what we commonly refer to as House Bill 80. It's our distribution process for when state aid is given to the Community College Commission, how it is then distributed, and how courses are weighted, levels of instruction are weighted, things like that. And how there's room for improvement in that process. We've educated you on that. So where I'm going with all of these comments, Mr. Chairman, is that this is a great tool to give us one step forward with sustainable funding for the colleges. But there's probably still some work to do. And so I appreciate the work that this committee has taken to listen to us and learn more about what's happening. You know, I think as the home committee for the community colleges right now, this is important that you do learn this stuff. And we're so happy that you've been willing to listen to us. So I would just submit to you that there might be more opportunity for conversation in future interims as this bill, even if this bill moves forward. This, I don't think, is the last conversation that we need to have about community college funding. So I just wanted to offer that to you. I know some of the folks at the Community College Commission might have some comments for you, but I just wanted to say all 56 trustees, community college presidents, our industry partners, folks are really supportive of the community colleges across the state. And you know, we're the first boots on the ground working to train workforce and diversify our economy, but also we're serving as comprehensive community colleges. We're cultural hubs of our state. And that's something that a lot of other states don't have. Our community colleges truly are economic centers in our state. And just making sure that we can allow them to continue to grow, offer them the flexibility and the support from this legislature, I think is really important, and we appreciate that. So, Mr. Chairman, those are my comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, but just wanted to offer a little bit of a reminder of all of the work that's happened over the last several years in this space. It's important. And I appreciate your commitment to help moving it forward. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I wouldn't do it here as an amendment, but something I've been thinking about is as we decide how much money we, during session, we might want to put into this, I've thought about the idea of a challenge match program as well, so much automatically, but do you think there's any appetite out there in industry if we had a challenge match program that we could say, hey, maybe it's 5 million, maybe it's 10 million, maybe it's whatever. You match it, you put money in, we put money in, and try to get other sources of funding coming into this endowment so we can help, maybe it's a community that helps build this as well as the state. Any thoughts?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Summers, interesting idea. Certainly, you heard today how industry does step up and help partner with our community colleges when there's a need for a program. And that happens in the form of equipment. Sometimes it's in other types of funding. So that could be an interesting concept. I can tell you, with all of the work that I talked about in this report, when things like mill levies were mentioned, our industry partners did say, whoa, okay, we support the community colleges, but if our taxes are going to go up, we get a little nervous about that. And I respect that and absolutely understand that. But if there's an opportunity to pitch in other ways, I think that there might be some room to investigate that further.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Following up on that, my memory is that on occasion, when we've appropriated money to the University of Wyoming for matching funds, we've included the community colleges, and there was some fundraising there. I have a vague recollection that some colleges were more successful with that than others, and depending on, frankly, the wealth of the community. So my question is, do you know anything about prior experience with such matching programs at the community college level? Because I think there is a little.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, that's a great question. That has come up certainly in other instances. And one of the spaces that I can tell you with my experience is in the interest of CapCon. There have been put in place matching opportunities with capital construction, but recognizing that communities are different, the ability to raise those funds is different. And so there have been given, or I don't know if the right word is given or granted, some flexibility for, the smaller institutions, different communities. Maybe it's a 4-to-1 versus a 1-to-1. So there have been granted select or flexibility with the scale of how that's been drafted. I'm guessing some of the folks at the commission might have some more information on other opportunities where there's been that opportunity granted, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up.
Yeah, just thinking aloud for a moment. And I like Ms. Taylor's reaction to it. My instinct is that if we wanted to go that route, that the better strategy is to leave this bill clean and to have a bill to provide some matching funds for higher education that was in good part University of Wyoming, but included a community college aspect to it. And that might be a way that might have a better chance of succeeding in the political realm. But that's just my thought, and I'd be interested as to what the reaction of the community college would be to that kind of strategy.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I will tell you, I think the community colleges are always appreciative of the consideration. Over the years, it hasn't necessarily always been that the community colleges have been included in matching opportunities that the university has had. But they are definitely challenged. They're different institutions, smaller communities, different industry bases. And so they don't all have that same ability to match funds in the same way. So that would just be a consideration. Maybe it's in the budget bill or something like that. But the consideration would be something that would be appreciated.
I'm going to call a hard break here and we can resume with Ms. Taylor. We have a working lunch downstairs, I believe, in the Capitol Club. Is that right?
Yeah,
Co-chair.
It's
And
supposed
so-
to be in room 34 in the entryway about where I think to the one side or the other of where the Washki statue is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, it is to the right of the Chief Washki statue. And the lunch is being provided by Wyoming Kids First. Governor's office wanted to
And
pass that along.
I think, I think the meeting is public. I don't know whether there'd be food for the public or not, but I think the meeting is open. to the public.
Okay, let's recess. I'm guessing that'll take approximately an hour, so we'll say we're going to resume at somewhere around 1 o'clock, depending on the length of the presentation that